Chapter 7:26. The weather was getting hotter and hotter. The willow branches drooped listlessly. There was not a trace of wind, and those exposed to the sun soon began to sweat profusely. The cloudless sky seemed to have thinned out the clouds due to the heat. It was a vast expanse of whiteness. The sun in the vast expanse of whiteness did not have any reflections. It looked no bigger than a pancake, but its fiery light unbridledly spewed scorching heat onto the earth. Its might was something that even a great fire could not compare to. There was a depression at the edge of the forest, surrounded by a circle of elm trees. It was a rare shade. It had rained a few days ago, and the puddles on the ground looked very deep. Traces of water could be seen on the trunks of the trees, but now there was not a drop of water on the ground. The cracked ground was like tiles, rising up piece by piece. There was a well at the edge of the forest, and the mouth of the well was crowded with chitin warriors. Buckets of water were easily carried out by them, and the people and horses had already filled their stomachs. Now they were using the ice-cold well water to wash their hair, faces, and horses. The ground around the mouth of the well had been trampled into mud. Under a pergola, Yong Fan carefully wrapped his thigh with a piece of cloth and looked at Fei Mo beside him. Fei Mo's wound was very inelegant. Yong Fan had been shot in the thigh, but Fei Mo had been shot in the buttocks. He was depressed as he lay on a half-new pergola mat. A burly man had just finished dressing his wound. Yong Fan glanced at him and wanted to laugh. That burly man was really not stingy. Beside him were several rolls of white cloth that he had taken from a wealthy family. He used an entire roll of white cloth to wrap Fei Mo's black buttocks tightly. Now, Fei Mo did not need to wear a robe and did not need to worry about his spring scenery being exposed. However, looking at the way the white cloth was wrapped, it would probably be more troublesome if Fei Mo needed to urinate. After the imperial court rejected the Khitan's request for peace, Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong led the army out of the mountains to fight in Hebei. They were very good at field battles, but they were not good at sieging cities. It was difficult to take down a slightly larger city, and the rations in a small place could not support such a large army. Helpless, Li Jinzhong could only divide his main force into many small teams and use their powerful mobility to roam around and raid the enemy's rations. Fortunately, ever since they raised the slogan of Return our Luling and the Prince of Xiang, in order to win over the hearts of the people, they did not dare to go too far. They rarely harassed the poor and small families. After all, those families didn't have much to gain from it. However, those rich families were out of luck. Whether it was grain, cloth, horses, cows, or medicinal herbs, there was nothing they didn't want. If they obediently offered it to them, they would return it. If they risked their lives and refused to part with their wealth, then they would take away their wealth along with their lives. However, Li Jinzhong's team was like mud that couldn't support a wall. It was destined that they wouldn't last long. Although they had cleverly chosen the correct political slogan, they had only taken the initiative in politics and exerted a certain amount of pressure on the imperial court. It did not improve their situation at all. They still didn't have a base of operations, nor did they have a set of long-term strategic plans. Their actions were no different from bandits. It was only because they wanted to win the support of the people that they shouted slogans in support of Li Tang that they couldn't go too far. Compared to the bandits that swallowed everything like locusts, their destructive power was not as great. The Khitans muddled along for more than a month as they plundered and plundered. Their strategic prospects had not improved, but their relationship with the Shi was growing closer. The Shi saw that the Khitans were unhindered in Hebei and that the imperial court was helpless against them. That lion that had once shaken the East was truly getting old and finally agreed to cooperate with them. When the Khitans first came into contact with the Shi, this was still a top secret. However, as the two sides came into contact more and more frequently, and after they confirmed their alliance, this information was made public. Li Jinzhong publicized this news in order to boost the morale of the soldiers. The territory of the Shi bordered the nomadic lands of the Khitans, and the two had always had a close relationship. In the last few years, the imperial court's policies on the border and the ethnic groups had not been good. The empress's thoughts had always been on the imperial court, on cutting down all opposition and passing on the Wuzhou River Mountain. As a result, she had neglected to govern the border. The border generals who had inherited the border also had the authority to govern the border government, collecting taxes and governing the people living on the border. They took the opportunity to collect taxes and drain the resources of the ethnic groups in the border, causing the relationship between the border tribes and the Wuzhou imperial court to grow increasingly tense. The Shi tribe's decision to ally with the Khitans actually had no political agenda. They had no ambition to expand their territory, and they had no delusions of overthrowing the imperial court. After allying with the Khitans, they did not have any political goals. They were fighting purely for the sake of war, and this was the culmination of many years of accumulated grievances. At this time, the army of the king of Jianan, Wu Yui, finally arrived. Wu Zetian accepted Di Renjia's conditions. The day after she visited the Di residence, she issued an edict that Di Renjia, assistant minister of Luantai, Tongfeng Pavilion's Luantai Pingzhang, as well as Yin Qing, Guanglu Daifu, and Nayan would be promoted to the chief scribe of the Political Affairs Bureau. He would be given a purple robe and a tortoise belt, and she personally wrote on the purple robe, "Apply political wood, be diligent, and diligent, be promoted to prominent position, encourage ministers." At the same time, according to Di Renjia's request, she appointed Crown Prince Li Dan as the Grand Marshal and Di Renjia as the Deputy Marshal. Of course, Wu Zetian could not really let the Crown Prince be the Grand Marshal. What if the Crown Prince gathered enough troops to launch a counterattack on the capital? The Crown Prince's Grand Marshal was only a nominal position, and Di Renjia would be the Deputy Marshal. Even so, this action was approved by the Crown Prince Society. The Crown Prince Society also knew that this matter could not be accomplished overnight. It was enough to use this matter to expand the Crown Prince's prestige and influence. Thus, Wei, Yuanzhong, Yao Chong, and the other ministers of the Crown Prince's faction changed from nonviolent non-cooperation to fully cooperating with Di Renjia, using the Crown Prince's banner to recruit troops. The Crown Prince Society, Luling Society, Taiping Society, and other remnants of Li Tang's imperial family, along with the cooperation of the various aristocratic families, turned the previous resistance into the greatest driving force. They quickly recruited an army and prepared enough provisions. Just by using the title of Crown Prince, he had gained so much power and was supported by so many people. Wu Zetian had no idea how these hidden powers worked, and she was only shocked by the results. Her determination to pass on the empire to the Wu clan's descendants began to waver. She did not want to die like this. She believed that, as the only female emperor in history, she was a great emperor on par with Qin Shi Huang and Sui when emperor. Only because of this did she not want to follow in the footsteps of Qin Shi Huang and Sui when emperor. If the successor she had chosen did not have the support of the people, not only would her empire not be able to pass on, even her grave would not be preserved. This matter wavered Wu Zetian's resolve, and she began to reconsider her plans for the future of the empire. She personally gave a farewell dinner to Di Renjia. As the new prime minister of the Wuzhou Empire, Di Renjia led his army to the western regions, meeting up with the Helong border army and launching a counterattack against the Turkic Khan Moki. As for the northern army, because of the emperor's concession, their political goal had been achieved. The various anti-martial factions in the empire could not allow the Khitans to grow in power in the north and cause even greater harm to the court. Thus, Wu Yui's army finally gathered enough men and began to head for the battlefield in Hebei. However, there were a large number of prisoners and servants in the northern army. These people might be valiant in battle, but their military discipline was simply too poor. Things like stealing chickens and dogs, falsely claiming military merits, and raping women were endless. Compared to the harm the Khitans caused to the local people, they were not inferior in any way. After Wu Yui led his army to Hebei, He was extremely fearful of the Khitan's military strength because his 160,000-strong army had been completely annihilated. At this time, there was also news that King Shi had sent troops to ally with the Khitans. Thus, he adopted a conservative strategy of confrontation. He concentrated his main forces on the front lines of Yuan and Yuzhou, resisting the Shi in the north and the Khitans in the south. The Khitans were naturally not stupid enough to initiate a decisive battle. They continued to attack in all directions, only avoiding the places where Wu Yi had stationed his troops. The two sides thus entered a phase of confrontation. The Khitans continued to wreak havoc in Hebei, while the imperial army was as steady as Mount Tai. More than 100,000 troops were stationed on the front lines of Hebei, and the expenditure of money and rations was like flowing water. The Khitans did not dare to attack the heavily fortified cities, so they could only sweep through some small villages and towns. There was no point in raiding villages and towns that had already been swept through. Gradually, there was a severe shortage of rations and fodder. Helpless, Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong could only once again set their sights on Lulong. Lulong was an important city, and there were very few other cities in the vicinity that could garrison troops to help defend it. It was the best target. If they could capture this city, the supply problem would immediately be solved. Wu Yi did not dare to sit idly by and watch such an important city fall. After receiving the news, he immediately sent a large number of troops to help. The Khitans could not attack Lulong, and the imperial court's reinforcements had already arrived. They used the same trick again and used the advantage of the cavalry's mobility to travel day and night to attack Danzhou. However, they had already played this trick once. How could the Zhou army fall for it? Danzhou's walls were high and thick. As long as they were prepared, it was wishful thinking for the Khitans' cavalry to attack it. The Khitans were helpless. Due to the lack of rations and fodder, they could not immediately escape back to the mountains, so they could only wander around the vicinity. Now, they had captured Guizhou and the surrounding villages and towns. Guizhou was the famous Zhuolu in history. This place was in the middle of the various cities guarded by the Zhou army. All along, the Khitans had been worried that they would be surrounded by the Zhou army if they attacked this place, so they did not dare to attack lightly. However, firstly, they urgently needed to replenish their rations. Secondly, after this period of confrontation, they also understood Wu Yi's strategy. They predicted that Wu Yi would not dare to take the initiative to fight, so they boldly launched an attack on Zhuolu. Zhuolu city was originally guarded by about 3,000 Zhou soldiers. There were also about 2,000 soldiers who had retreated here. Although the city walls were not high, the casualties were not small. Therefore, in the beginning, the Khitans wanted to use the captured Zhou generals as meat shields to easily take down Zhuolu. Unexpectedly, when they escorted the captured Zhou generals to the front of the city, the Zhou army in the city fired arrows and killed all the Zhou generals who were used as meat shields. The captive generals and the Khitans who were escorting them to attack the city were immediately shot into hedgehogs. Yang Fan was also a meat shield. Thankfully, he had sharp eyes and quick reflexes. Just as the Zhou army raised their bows and knocked their arrows, he saw that the situation was amiss and fell to the ground. He rolled towards a slightly undulating mound beside him and kicked Fei Mo to the ground. In the end, only the two of them survived and scrambled to escape. When the imperial court refused to negotiate for peace, Zhang Xuanyu and Ma Rengje, the two generals, had been beheaded by Li Jinzhong to vent his anger. If Sun Wanrong had not stopped them in time and said that these surrendered generals were still useful, the other dozen or so captive generals would have died. Sun Wanrong's idea was to use these captive generals as meat shields, but he was completely wrong. The Tang people did not have the tradition of compromising because of hostages. If someone took hostages, the government would never care about the hostages' lives. They would rather kill them decisively than compromise with the criminals. Although they were in the army, and this was no ordinary criminal case, the Zhou army would not cower and wait for death just because of them. Yang Fan had been forced to save Fei Mo. Of the Khitans, only Fei Mo had a good impression of him. If Fei Mo died, even if he managed to escape the crossbows of the Zhou army, he would still be killed by the enraged Khitans. Fei Mo was his protective umbrella. The slogan, "Return my Luling and the Prince of Xiang," was a fulcrum, while the Khitan army and the various anti-martial factions in the court were the two ends of the lever. Yang Fan had used this lever to easily alter the political situation that Wu Zetian had painstakingly managed from the moment she ascended to the throne, but he was still helpless in his own situation. Fortunately, this meat shield incident had slightly improved his situation. Because of the attitude that Yang Fan had always displayed toward the Wuzhou imperial court and the fact that he had saved the lives of the Khitan generals, the Khitans no longer held much hostility toward him, other than still restricting his freedom. They now completely treated him as one of their own. Yang Fan's chances of escaping the enemy camp had greatly increased, but he still needed a chance. He was currently in the center of the Khitans, so escaping was just wishful thinking. Moreover, his leg just happened to be wounded by an arrow, making it even harder for him to move. Fei Mo struggled to get up, but after struggling for a long time, she couldn't move. She couldn't help but angrily curse. "How the hell did you bandage it? This old man can't even separate his legs." Yang Fan said, "It's really hard on the big man to have him embroider. Lie down and don't move. I'll do it." He propped himself up with both hands and dragged his injured leg closer to Fei Mo. Just as he was thinking about how to untie the knot on Fei Mo's buttocks, a few Khitan soldiers escorted a group of well-dressed people over. One of the Khitan soldiers cupped his fists towards Fei Mo and said, "General Fei, we've brought all the gentry of this town." Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong had already entered Zhuolu City. As Fei Mo had been injured during the siege, he had been withdrawn and left to guard the town that had already been occupied. Now that Zhuolu City had been conquered, they could only care about the town in front of them. Their only goal in attacking Zhuolu was to resupply, so they naturally wouldn't let this town go. Gathering the aristocrats in the town to intimidate them was the experience the Khitans had accumulated over the past few months of plundering. Some of the landlord's food was hidden extremely well, so it was time-consuming and laborious to search for it themselves. Seeing that the aristocrats had arrived, Fei Mo temporarily stopped Yang Fan's actions. She struggled to sit up, ignoring the fact that her snow-white buttocks were still exposed. She pretended to be fierce and prepared to intimidate them. Yang Fan didn't care about the aristocrats and only casually swept his gaze at them. Therefore, he didn't notice that one of the aristocrats had a strange look of surprise in his eyes when he saw him. Chapter 7:27. With a ferocious expression, Fei Mo said in an angry voice, "You must have heard that we Khitan people are mobilizing because we are fighting for the Li family and to restore Li Tang's empire. Right now, we are under attack by the Zhou army and lack rations. We need you local gentry to help us. If you help us today, in the future, we will help Li Tang restore his empire. You will be meritorious people. At that time, the imperial court will naturally return the money and rations you borrowed today. If you are not willing to hand over the rations, then you are part of the Zhou army, traitors, and treacherous officials. This General Saber will not be lenient when it comes to killing people." This town was slightly more affluent than most small towns. There was also a very large manor in the town. There were no luxurious buildings inside, which meant that this was not a local landlord, but one of the local residences of a major landlord from the large city of Defu. Fei Mo and the others had raided many wealthy families and were very clear that this meant that this family owned a large amount of land. In that case, their residences might not have much, but they would definitely have a lot of rations. Fei Mo's long experience in raiding made him know that rather than wasting time and energy plundering each family, it was better to intimidate these large families into paying on their own. Fei Mo grabbed the saber on the side of the mat and forcefully stabbed it into the ground. In a stern voice, he said, "In a moment, All of you go back and gather rations. This general will say the ugly words first. If any of you dare to hide your rations, once we find them, your entire family will be executed. Not even chickens or dogs will be spared. Do you want money or your life? Think about what to do. Fei Mo's saber was stained with blood. Such a forceful stab had a rather frightening effect. However, he was half undressed and kneeling on the mat with his large buttocks wrapped in white cloth. It was truly not a frightening sight, but rather a rather ridiculous one. Among the gentry, the one who had revealed a shocked expression when he first saw Yang Fan had already recovered. Like the other gentry, he listened to Fei Mo's lecture with an expression of fear and trepidation. He no longer glanced at Yang Fan, but he kept glancing at Yang Fan out of the corner of his eye. After repeated identification, he was convinced. This person must be Yang Fan. This person who had mingled with the gentry group was called Liang Shuang. He was not a local gentry, but a steward of a wealthy family. The wealthy family he belonged to was the Fanyang Lu family, the uncrowned king of the Hebei region. When Yang Fan returned from the southern border and first entered Chang, and the second son of the Lu family, Lu Binji, had schemed to deal with him in order to avenge his elder brother, Lu Binmi. At that time, the person who was sent to investigate Yang Fan's background was Lu Binji, so he knew Yang Fan. At that time, Yang Fan was just an imperial envoy of the imperial court. Later on, Yang Fan replaced Lu Binmi and became the head of the succession hall. Following that, he fought with Lu Binmi openly and covertly. To others, this might be a big secret, but to Lu Binji and his confidant Yang Shuang, it was crystal clear. When the news of Lu Binmi committing suicide in Hulao Pass reached the Lu family, everyone in the Lu family hated Yang Fan to the extreme. However, it was obvious that Lu Binmi was in the wrong in this matter, and Yang Fan had already magnanimously let him go. He only saved his daughter, so he didn't do anything wrong. If it was an ordinary family, the Lu family could be unreasonable and use the Lu family's power to kill the other party to vent their anger. But Yang Fan was different. With Yang Fan's current status, and under the circumstances where Yang Fan was reasonable, the Lu family did not dare to act without regard for the consequences. The tragic death of his elder brother caused Lu Binji, who was grounded at home, to be in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Every day, he would grit his teeth and curse Yang Fan to die early. Perhaps it was because sincerity could move metal and stone. Not long ago, the Lu family suddenly received a piece of news that made Lu Binji wild with joy. He thought that the heavens had eyes because Yang Fan had gone missing. Yang Fan had gone missing in the Yellow Deer Valley while accompanying the army on a northern expedition. In this battle, the imperial court's army of 160,000 was wiped out. Less than 20,000 of the wounded and defeated soldiers managed to escape. Corpses covered the entire Yellow Deer Valley, and the road from Yellow Deer Valley to Horse City was also littered with corpses. The corpse refining cauldron in Thousand Gold Smelting City worked day and night, but it had only processed a third of the corpses. There was still no news of Yang Fan in the succession hall. Judging from the death rate of the great Zhou soldiers, Yang Fan was likely dead. The succession hall had been temporarily taken over by the heads of the 7 great clans. All major matters and decisions were jointly decided by the 7 great clans. While this would seriously affect efficiency and delay some urgent matters, as an emergency measure it was the best they could do. As one of the 7 great clans, the Lu family naturally couldn't hide such matters from them. As the legitimate heir of the Lu family, Lu Binji, who had become the only heir of the Lu family after his elder brother's tragic death, naturally knew everything. As his trusted aide, Liang Shuang was one of the few people in the Lu family who knew. However, he never expected that Yang Fan, whom his young master believed to be dead in battle, was actually alive and well. Furthermore, he was right in front of him, in the midst of the Khitan army. The Lu family had a large manor in the local area that had nearly 1,000 acres of land. More than a third of the townspeople were tenants of the Lu family. Liang Shuang was here on his young master's orders to patrol the area, but the Khitans happened to attack Zhuolu. The town was caught in the crossfire, and he who couldn't escape in time was trapped in the manor. Upon seeing Yang Fan, Liang Shuang placed all his attention on Yang Fan. He no longer cared about the grain in his manor's grain cellar. Even if all the grain there had been plundered, it was nothing to the powerful Lu family. Yang Fan was the Lu family's greatest enemy. Liang Shuang's first reaction was that Yang Fan had been captured by the Khitans. However, from the Khitan soldiers' attitude towards Yang Fan, it didn't seem like they treated him as a prisoner. At the very least, they didn't show much hostility. This was strange. Liang Shuang didn't think that Yang Fan was an accomplice of the Khitans. Regardless of why Yang Fan wanted to come into contact with the Khitans, he wouldn't go as far as to disappear and cause chaos in the succession hall. Liang Shuang couldn't help but be curious about the role Yang Fan was playing at the moment. When he dealt with Yang Fan in Chang, and including the assassination attempt on Yang Fan by the Tsuchi River and Furong Bridge, Liang Shuang was only responsible for investigating, dispatching, and arranging in secret. He didn't go into battle himself, so he wasn't worried that Yang Fan would see through his identity. With this doubt in his mind, he wanted to find out why Yang Fan had appeared here. After intimidating them for a while, she had the Khitan soldiers escort the aristocrats back to gather grain. Liang Shuang was unusually cooperative and took the initiative to contribute all the grain stored in the manor, including several hidden cellars that were hard to be discovered. After gaining the Khitan's favor, Liang Shuang indirectly inquired about Yang Fan's current situation. He learned that Yang Fan was indeed a prisoner of the Khitans, but the Khitans had no intention of executing him. Liang Shuang was secretly anxious. He didn't think that the Khitans could achieve great things. In his view, under the attack of the imperial army, the Khitans' defeat was only a matter of time. At that time, Yang Fan would inevitably be rescued. Moreover, once the succession hall learned of Yang Fan's situation, they would definitely do their best to rescue him. He believed that with the succession hall's financial resources, they would definitely use a condition that the Khitans couldn't refuse to make a deal with. Although Yang Fan was now trapped in the Khitan army's chaotic situation, and there was no guarantee that he wouldn't die on the battlefield, it was still only a possibility. Back then, Wang Xiaojia, who had reclaimed the 4 garrisons of Anqi and rendered an unparalleled service, had been defeated and captured and brought to the Tubo royal city. But in the end, did he not manage to return safe and sound? The second young master deeply hated Yang Fan, but unfortunately, he couldn't do anything to Yang Fan. If he couldn't take advantage of his weakness and kill him, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't escape. Thinking of this, Liang Shuang was burning with anxiety. However, in the hands of the Khitans, Yang Fan had an invisible layer of protection. He couldn't do anything to Yang Fan. After thinking about it, Liang Shuang just wanted to quickly report this news to the second young master and let him decide. However, he was also worried that the Khitans would rob the provisions and leave as usual. If that happened, he would be in a panic and unable to find Yang Fan's whereabouts. What was strange was that this time the Khitans didn't leave immediately. In the afternoon, Fei Emo summoned the town's gentry again and asked them to vacate the houses for her soldiers. It seemed that they were going to stay in the town for a few days. Liang Shuang was secretly happy and quickly arranged for people to sneak out during the night to report to the second young master in Zhuozhou. It wasn't that the Khitans didn't want to move quickly, but they couldn't leave. The Khitans couldn't leave not because Wu Yui suddenly changed his mind and took the initiative to send troops to encircle and suppress them, but because their Supreme Khan Li Jinzhong was critically ill. Last time, Li Jinzhong had been shot in the back by an arrow. Although he had applied medicine and bandaged the wound, it hadn't fully healed. After all, he was an old man in his 60s. His recovery speed was far slower than that of a man in his prime. He hadn't even fully recovered from the arrow wound when he led troops out of the mountains to fight in Hebei. In the process, the arrow wound on his back had burst open. It was a hot summer, and he was in the army fighting everywhere. The arrow wound hadn't been treated well, so it had finally become a fatal problem. In fact, Li Jinzhong was also aware of his own injury. However, there was no food in the army, so he, as Khan, had to lead the troops into battle to solve the food problem. In order to avoid shaking the army's morale, he had been busy discussing the alliance with the Shi people, so he had kept his injury a secret. Li Jinzhong had dragged his sick body to fight everywhere, and his body was already at the end of its tether. In this attack on Zhuolu City, Li Jinzhong personally supervised the battle. A healthy old man couldn't stand the scorching sun for a long time, let alone him. So when Zhuolu City was taken, Li Jinzhong had just entered the city gates when his vision went black and he fell off his horse. Only a few people knew of his injury, and Grand Marshal Sun Wanrong was one of them. Seeing the Khan faint, Sun Wanrong panicked and hurriedly rescued Li Jinzhong. He temporarily placed him in a large family's home. To the outside world, he only said that the Khan had fainted from heat exhaustion and didn't dare reveal the truth. He secretly inquired about the city's famous doctors to treat him. Under these circumstances, they naturally couldn't move immediately. The Khitans occupied Zhuolu and set up camp there. In the face of the Tang army's superior military strength, the Khitans' greatest strength was their mobility. Now that they couldn't leave and the Khan's injury couldn't be announced to the outside world, Sun Wanrong couldn't help but fall into a dilemma. Wu Yu's only mobile force had been sent to Lulong and had yet to return. After learning of the fall of Zhuolu, he was worried that the Shi people would attack him from behind when he sent troops to Zhuolu. If he stayed in the city and defended it, he would be suspected of leaving the Khan to die. Wu Yu and Sun Wanrong immediately became a pair of brothers in the same dilemma. Chapter 7:28. Zhuolu City wasn't quiet at night. The maddeningly hot summer heat hadn't completely subsided even in the middle of the night. Tens of thousands of soldiers were gathered in Zhuolu City. Even if only 1/10 of the people were woken up by mosquitoes or wanted to get out of bed, the noise created would be like 10,000 flies, making the summer night even more irritating. However, the large manor that Li Jinzhong was temporarily staying in was abnormally quiet. Even the horses that occasionally neighed were led out of the manor. Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong's tribe's absolute trusted aides were stationed around the perimeter. The original owner of the manor and all his family members and servants were escorted into the stables to be guarded. Luo Wuzhen, He Xiao, and the other important generals had already rushed over when they heard the news. They crowded around Li Jinzhong's bed. The room was filled with lanterns, illuminating the room. However, due to the large number of people, even though the windows were open, the room still felt a little stuffy. When the city's famous doctor, Bao Difu, usually visited, the patients' families would treat him respectfully like a living ancestor. But today, under the chitin sabers and swords, he felt Li Jinzhong's pulse. His face was sallow, and he was covered in cold sweat. His body was trembling like a sieve. Those who didn't know better would think that the doctor sitting by the bed was the patient. "Doctor, how is he?" Sun Wanrong waited for a while and finally couldn't help but ask. Bao Difu knew that this person was incurable the moment he felt his pulse. However, due to the chitin's despotic power, he had no choice but to put on an act and act like he was going all out. Now that Sun Wanrong asked him, he was so frightened that he trembled and answered with a trembling voice, This patient was originally injured by an arrow. The qi and blood in his spine were stagnant, and the heat prevailed over the flesh. Later, before his injuries could heal, he moved violently, causing the arrow wound to relapse, causing blood to flow. Now that it's summer, the heat has entered his body. Xiao was infuriated when she heard that. She grabbed his collar and lifted the pitiful Dr. Bao up like a bag of herbs. Her feet dangled in the air. "What the F***CK are you talking about? Tell me, how is our Khan? Is his illness serious?" Bao Difu was choked by him until he couldn't breathe. His face turned red and he stuttered. "This patient's heart has been attacked by the evil fire, and the heat poison has entered his body." He can't be saved. Everyone should make arrangements for his funeral." "What did you say?" He Xiao glared at him and shouted fiercely. Sun Wanrong waved his hand and ordered, "Put him down!" Sun Wanrong told He Xiao to put Bao Difu down and said kindly, "This little brother of mine is a rough man. Please don't blame him, Mr. Bao. Is my elder brother really hopeless? Is there not even a chance?" Bao Difu saw that he was speaking in a friendly manner, and his courage grew a bit. He frankly replied, "Old sir, the patient is not young anymore. After the arrow wound, the wound repeatedly burst open, so that his condition is getting more and more serious. But he has not been able to receive timely treatment, and now even medicine and stones cannot cure him. Speaking of a chance, to be honest, I've been practicing medicine with my father since I was 7 years old. When I was 17, I started treating patients on my own. I've been practicing medicine for more than 40 years now. Based on my lifetime of experience, this patient is definitely hopeless. If it wasn't for his strong body, he wouldn't have been able to hold on until now." Sun Wanrong's eyes dimmed. After a moment of silence, he said, "Thank you for your trouble, mister. Please take a rest in the wing room. Perhaps we'll need your help in the future." Dr. Bao nodded and sighed softly. He picked up his medicine box and was led out by the guard. When they reached the wing room, the chitin guard pushed open the door and gestured for Dr. Bao to enter. The moment Bao Difu stepped into the room, he was shocked to see 4 to 5 people lying on the floor. There were even a few medicine boxes among the blood. Soon his vision turned black, and he sank into an eternal world of darkness in Li Jinzhong's room. Luo Wuqing said dejectedly, "6 doctors have concluded that the Khan is dead. What should we do?" Sun Wanrong did not speak. Only with a gloomy face, he sat down by the bed and gently held Li Jinzhong's hand. Li Jinzhong's palm had a strange dry heat, but looking at his pale face, his body that was still trembling in unconsciousness, he seemed to be in extreme cold. The room gradually quieted down. Only the heavy panting of the chitin leaders could be heard. After a long time, Li Jinzhong groaned and slowly opened his eyes. Sun Wanrong hurriedly leaned forward and called out, "Khan!" Li Jinzhong opened his lifeless eyes and looked at them. He said with difficulty, "Wanrong, am I not going to make it?" Sun Wanrong wanted to dodge the question, but when he thought about how Li Jinzhong was not going to leave this world and there were many things he needed to explain to him, he was at a loss for words. If he were to confess this time, he might not wake up the next time. Li Jinzhong looked at his expression and smiled faintly. He said calmly, "I'm already 67 years old. At this age, it's not a loss even if I die. What's there to be sad about? As the chief of the tribe, the entire tribe is counting on us. It's our responsibility to resist the tyranny of Zhou dynasty for our people. Now that I can't make it, I'll leave everything to you." Sun Wanrong was moved. "Khan," Li Jinzhong panted a few times and said, "You and I are in-laws. After I die, please take care of my tribe. After I die, you must not call me Khan immediately. The news of my death must be kept a secret." Hot tears finally fell from Sun Wanrong's eyes. He nodded repeatedly, "I understand." Li Jinzhong said, "After I die, don't be in a hurry to return to the mountains. To the outside world, just say that I'm sick and need to return to the mountains to recuperate. You will continue to command the army. You must lead the people to win a few more battles, just like Yellow Deer Valley. Use this to establish your reputation. Only then will you receive the trust and support of the entire army. Moreover, as long as you win a few more battles, you will be able to make the hesitant king send his troops to join the battle. The Turks will definitely continue to take advantage of the situation to share our pressure." Li Jinzhong closed his eyes as if he was gathering all the strength in his body. After a long while, he opened his eyes again and said with difficulty, "The Turks are ambitious and not kind. They cannot be trusted, but when necessary, there's no harm in forming an alliance with them. We must pave a path of survival for our people." Sun Wanrong nodded vigorously with tears in his eyes. Li Jinzhong looked at Luo Wuzhen, He Xiao and the other chiefs who had mobilized with him. Gathering all the strength in his body, he said sternly, "The fate of us Khitan people will be in your hands. All of you should be as loyal to Wanrong as you are to me, for our survival to fight." Luo Wuzhen and the other Khitan generals all knelt on one knee and placed their right hands on their chest. They said in unison, "We solemnly obey the Supreme Great Khan's order. All of you, leave first. I and Wanrong will be alone for a while." The generals lightly stepped out of the room and closed the door. Only Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong were left in the room. Li Jinzhong used his weak hand to gently hold Sun Wanrong's hand. He laughed bitterly. "Jinzhong is really going to die. Wanrong must not be killed. You must do your best. You must live well." The Lu family's foundation was in Zhuozhou. The north had never been peaceful. As the #1 aristocratic family in the north, for their own safety, the Lu family had spared no effort in managing Zhuozhou for thousands of years. The walls of the city were high and thick, and the river was wide and deep. It was a sturdy city that was very difficult to destroy. Zhuozhou City also had a regimental training troop, recruited from the locals. All the major border cities of the north had regimental training troops, and Zhuozhou was where the Lu family's foundation was located. The regimental training here was especially powerful. There were nearly 8,000 soldiers, and whether it was in terms of daily training or equipment, they were superior to the regular troops of the border army. Moreover, this city was the home of these regimental training troops. As the soldiers of the city, if anyone wanted to invade this place, they would swear to fight to the death. Not only were they powerful, their morale was also reliable. Even if this army was not garrisoned by the regular troops of the imperial court, it would not be easy to gnaw at them, let alone the fact that the imperial court had stationed a large force here. If such a powerful aristocratic family were to be plundered by bandits, it would be an unimaginably massive disaster for the imperial court. The political repercussions would be enough to erase all of the Wuzhou imperial court's achievements, even if the Wuzhou imperial court had not accomplished anything other than recovering the 4 garrisons of Anqi. The Khitans also knew that this place was a hard bone to chew, so they had never had any intentions of conquering it. Although Lu Zhongjia was forced to return to Fanyang by Yang Fan, he had sworn an oath in the name of his ancestors. As a result, even though he was unwilling, he still strictly obeyed the oath and confined Lu Binji to his home. He also withdrew all of the Lu family members who were outside. Lu Binji had been cultivating his mind and character in the Lu clan, reading and practicing calligraphy. He appeared to be extremely leisurely, but he knew everything that was happening outside like the back of his hand. Although the Lu family had already retreated to Fanyang, the Lu family was like a giant spider. They had a giant and invisible web spread outside. Even the slightest sign of trouble would be immediately transmitted to their ears. The news of Zhuolu's fall had been delivered to him together with the news of Yang Fan's appearance. It wasn't a secret that the Khitans were temporarily stationed in Zhuolu. In any case, the Khitans' mounted scouts were dozens of kilometers away. If the imperial court's troops did anything, they would immediately sense it. With their mobility far superior to the imperial court's troops, they could retreat in time, so their defenses weren't strict. Furthermore, the person Liang Shuang had sent was a very shrewd and skilled person. He was very familiar with the terrain of the Zhuolu area. The Khitans had set up defenses in the periphery to guard against the movement of large troops. There was no way they could stop a scout or 2 from entering and leaving. Lu Binji had originally believed that Yang Fan was already dead. He had even burned incense and prayed before his deceased brother's coffin, informing his brother's spirit in heaven of the good news. Now he was shocked to hear that Yang Fan was still alive and well. Furthermore, he had received preferential treatment from the Khitans. It didn't seem like he was in danger. Lu Binji was dumbfounded. Yang Fan must die. Lu Binji snapped to his senses, and his expression suddenly turned ferocious. It's rare for him to be alone in my territory. This is my only chance. If I let him escape and obtain the protection of the succession hall again, we will no longer have a chance. Therefore, no matter what, I have to kill him. Chapter 729. The summer night, when there was no wind, was like a dose of knockout drug, making people drowsy, weak, and suffocating. Yang Fan was lying on a mat. He didn't know how long he had slept, but he suddenly felt suffocated. He opened his eyes and saw that the sky was still dark. His mouth was dry, and he sat up in a daze. He felt for the wooden crutch he had made himself and propped it under his right arm. He groped his way to the table, grabbed the kettle, and gulped down a mouthful of water. He then walked to the toilet at the end of the bed. The crutch tapped on the floor, making a dong-dong sound. A figure immediately appeared at the window and peeked inside. Borrowing the weak moonlight, the figure saw that Yang Fan had gotten up at night and retracted his head. Yang Fan had been living in this small town for 3 days. He also felt it strange that the Chitons would suddenly stay here. The surrounding cities were densely packed, and they were all the territory of the imperial court. If the Chitons wanted to choose a stronghold, this was definitely not a good choice. The best choice should be Lulong. For the first 2 days, Fei Mo had been complaining to him. She didn't understand why the army was stationed here, but after He Xiao came yesterday morning, Fei Mo didn't complain anymore. He didn't know what He Xiao had said to him. After going to the toilet, Yang Fan suddenly didn't feel sleepy anymore. Leaning on his crutch, he walked step by step to the window. Outside the window, the patrolling warriors were pacing back and forth like ghosts in the middle of the night. The moonlight reflected off the sabers in their hands, reflecting a touch of cold light. Anyone who looked at them would involuntarily feel a sense of coolness. There was only half a moon in the sky. It was covered by a thin mist, so it wasn't bright. Yang Fan let out a soft sigh. He couldn't help but think of his wife and children. Gazing at the half-moon covered by thin clouds, Yang Fan thought in a daze, if the Chiton people stay here, it's not bad. Once my leg injury is better, it'll be easy for me to escape. Once I return to the mountains, it'll be hard for me to escape. In the third courtyard of the mansion, there was a row of rooms on the east wall. It was dark and unlit, but in one of the rooms, there were 2 figures sneaking around each other. One of them was Liang Shuang, and the other was the secret agent he had sent to Zhuozhou. His name was Zhang Shihao. Liang Shuang lowered her voice and asked, "What instructions does young master have?" Zhang Shihao said, "Young master said that this is a rare opportunity and that he must die here." Liang Shuang frowned and said, "I tried my best to curry favor with the Chitons so that they would not make things too difficult for us. But in the end, we are not their people. It's true that Yang Fan is in our territory, but he's not alone. How can we kill him?" Zhang Shihao said, "Young master has already issued a death order. Once he escapes, there won't be another chance. Young master said that no matter if it's poisoning, assassination, or assassination, any method is fine. If necessary, we can abandon this manor, set it on fire, and cause chaos. In the chaos, we can take his life. As long as we can accomplish this, young master will not hesitate to reward us handsomely." Liang Shuang carefully calculated for a while, then nodded and said, "You go and rest first. I'll make a good plan and see if there's an opportunity to make a move." Zhang Shihao said, "I haven't shown my face here for the past 2 days. If a new face suddenly appears, won't it arouse their suspicions?" Liang Shuang scoffed and said, "Don't worry. All of us have been locked up in this courtyard. Those Chiton soldiers have never looked us in the eye, nor have they counted our numbers. Who would remember who you are?" Only then did Zhang Shihao feel relieved. Taking advantage of the darkness, he quietly escaped. Liang Shuang gazed at the hazy moon in the sky and let out a long sigh. The Lu family manor was the largest in the town. The Chiton general named Fei Mo naturally moved here, and so did Yang Fan. However, although he was close at hand, it was easier said than done to kill him. The Khitan soldiers who were guarding against Yang Fan's escape were also his best protection. It would be difficult to carry out young master's order in Zhulu City, in the mansion where Li Jinzhong was. Li Jinzhong struggled for another 3 days, but in the end he couldn't hold on. At the third watch he sadly breathed his last. The generals under him had led their own warriors to guard the perimeter. They had already occupied Zhulu for many days, so they couldn't ignore the imperial court's troops. Therefore, they weren't guarding by his side. When he breathed his last, there was no one beside him except Sun Wanrong. The room was still filled with the smell of medicine and Li Jinzhong's rotting body. Mosquitoes flew tirelessly in the hazy night. Suddenly, they would sneak attack Sun Wanrong, who was sitting by the bed like a corpse. Sun Wanrong was in a trance and didn't notice them at all. After a long while, he gently wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Men!" The door opened and a few personal guards quickly walked in. As nomads, every adult man was a warrior. The tribal leader didn't have any special guards on a daily basis. During times of war, the herdsmen of the tribe were his army. As for the most trusted soldiers, they came from the families that had the closest relationship with the tribal leader. The warriors stationed in the manor were Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong's absolute trusted aides. The warriors all had heavy expressions. Some of them had tear stains on their faces, but none of them cried in front of Sun Wanrong. All they did was quietly listen to his orders. Sun Wanrong instructed in a hoarse voice, "Gather all the herbs and place them with the Khan's body. Don't use a coffin. The news of the Khan's death must not be made public." Yes, a fierce glint flashed in Sun Wanrong's eyes as he said, "When we leave Zhulu City, we have to burn this mansion. We have to throw all the corpses of the doctors who were executed inside. We can't let anyone identify them." Yes, Sun Wanrong's voice was still hoarse, but as he spoke, the faint sound of metal clanging could be heard. "Pass the order to all the soldiers. From tomorrow onwards, mobilize all the horses, mules, and carriages. Gather all the rations that the various tribes have gathered. Fill the sacks with rice and the sacks with carriages. The day after tomorrow, the army will set off and return to the mountains." The first 2 orders were for his personal guards to hear, but the third order was for the entire army to hear. When he said this, his old and haggard face faintly revealed a kind of determination that was as sharp as a knife and a kind of strange excitement. These Khitan tribes had joined the war either because of Li Jinzhong, him, or the 2 of them. Now that Li Jinzhong had passed away, he had to shoulder all the responsibility. He was duty-bound to do so. From the first day they raised their flags in rebellion, he knew that the future would be filled with thorns if they wanted to fight against the behemoth-like imperial court. But back then, Li Jinzhong was the Khan, and he had assisted him from the side. The pressure had never been as heavy as it was today. Today he had to bear all of this. This was responsibility and motivation. An unprecedented fighting spirit surged in Sun Wanrong's heart. He wanted to fight a victorious battle, a great victory, so that Li Jinzhong's spirit could rest assured and all the clansmen could rest assured. He, Sun Wanrong, could still lead everyone down this path. Near noon the next day, Fei Mo suddenly received a military order. He immediately ordered someone to call Liang Shuang over. Liang Shuang had always tried his best to satisfy the various requests of the Khitan people. Seeing that he was obedient, Fei Mo didn't make things too difficult for him. Being nice to him was equivalent to setting an example for the other gentry. Only then would the gentry try their best to satisfy their requests. The people of the northern lands were fierce, and most of them practiced martial arts. If they were too harsh and even threatened their lives, these villagers would resist with all their might. Although they could suppress them, they would still suffer losses. When Liang Shuang saw Fei Mo, he pretended to be a yes man, nodded and bowed, and said, "General, you were looking for me?" Fei Emo stuck his butt out on the Kong and said in a rough voice, "Yes, we're going to leave now. Gather all your mules, horses, and carriages. Pack the grain into bags and move them to the carriages. Tie them up with ropes and cover them with linoleum. Otherwise, if it rains halfway, everything will be ruined." Liang Shuang was shocked and cried out, "What? You're going to leave just like that?" Fei Emo looked at him and said, "What? If I want to leave, do I need your permission?" Liang Shuang hurriedly said, "No, no, no. What I mean is, with so much grain, I'm afraid we won't be able to load all of it in a short time." Fei Emo said, "Oh, then you'll have to fight through the night. We are leaving early tomorrow morning. Go and do it now. Pack all the oil, salt, sauce, and vinegar and tie them up tightly. As long as you are obedient, I won't make things difficult for you. Otherwise, not only will I confiscate your property, I will also take your life." Hearing that they were leaving tomorrow, Liang Shuang felt slightly more at ease and hurriedly agreed. Fei Emo added, "Also, prepare a light carriage and cover it with 2 extra layers of mattresses. I want to use it." The corner of Liang Shuang's mouth twitched twice, and he hurriedly agreed. He went to the back and called out all the servants who were detained in the side courtyard. Under the supervision of the Khitan soldiers, they gathered all kinds of bags of rice and carriages of all sizes and loaded them into the carriages. In the grain cellar, Liang Shuang and Zhang Shihao stood on top of a mountain of rice, using wooden shovels to load the grains while muttering softly. Zhang Shihao propped up a rice bag and whispered, "They are leaving early tomorrow morning. What should we do about the matter that young master asked us to do? Can we think of a way to poison him?" Liang Shuang fiercely shoveled the grain and quickly glanced at the Khitan soldiers standing at the entrance of the granary. He lowered his voice and said, "They cooked the food themselves. We can't do anything. Besides, if we want to poison him, where will the poison come from? There is only one pharmacy in this town." As soon as they arrived, they took away all the medicine from the pharmacy, even the arsenic. They said that they want to use it to coat the arrows with poison. Zhang Shihao anxiously said, "Then what should we do? You know young master's temper. He hates Yang Fan to the bone. If we just watch as Yang Fan leaves—" Liang Shuang shoveled down and suddenly remembered something. He hurriedly shoveled a few more times and filled the rice bag. Then he grabbed the wooden shovel and went forward to help Zhang Shihao tie up the bag. He took the opportunity to whisper something to him. A trace of joy suddenly flashed across Zhang Shihao's face. He calmly nodded and carried a freshly filled bag of grain out of the grain cellar. Chapter 730. "Hey, what are you doing?" Zhang Shihao was busy working on the grain cart when a Khitan soldier, holding a saber, suddenly sensed something was amiss. He quickly walked over and asked fiercely. Zhang Shihao stood on the cart and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He nodded and bowed, saying, "This lowly one is loading the cart according to the general's orders." The Khitan soldier used his saber to point at a black jar in the middle of the sacks of rice and asked, "What is this?" Zhang Shihao smiled apologetically and said, "This is a jar of sesame oil." The Khitan soldier frowned and asked in confusion, "Why did you stuff the oil jar in the middle of the sacks of rice?" Zhang Shihao smiled apologetically and said, "Sir, the journey is too far and the road is bumpy. If the oil jar is loaded onto a cart by itself, it will break if you aren't careful. This lowly one is thinking that if you stuff the oil jar in the middle of the sacks of rice, it will be foolproof." Oh, the Khitan soldier's anger turned to joy. He patted his shoulder with his saber and praised, "That's good. Let's do it this way." "Yes, yes, yes." Zhang Shihao smiled apologetically as he watched the Khitan soldier strut away. He immediately gave an order to the other farmers. Therefore, in front of the Khitan soldiers, he grandly placed the oil jar, rice flour, and cloth together. The meat oil, sesame oil, sesame oil, sesame oil, sesame oil, and even tung oil, which was used to make lamp oil, were not only stuffed into the middle of the rice cart, but also several jars of cloth, bedding, and other goods were also stuffed into the cart. The Khitan soldiers naturally knew that oil was flammable. However, they only thought that the servants of the manor were trying to curry favor. They didn't expect that they were planning to set the cart on fire. This town had long been occupied by the Khitan people. These people had never shown any signs of resistance. Now that the Khitan people were about to leave, why would these people look for trouble when they were about to leave? Unknowingly, the sun had set. In the dusk, the entire manor was filled with carts filled with grain and cloth. The mules and horses plundered from the tenant farmers and other large families were also brought into the manor. They were ready to put on the mules and pull the grain carts away the next morning. At the entrance of the grain cellar, the Khitan soldiers held a saber in one hand and a torch in the other as they continued to monitor the situation with cold eyes. The farmers, on the other hand, were sweating profusely as they carried sacks of grain and continuously came out of the grain cellar. Under the night sky, the Liu family's manor was bustling with activity, as if the autumn harvest was in full swing. The moon was high up in the sky, and it was the third watch of the night. All of the grain in the grain cellar had been loaded onto the cart, and the tenant farmers who had been transferred to the manor to work dragged their tired footsteps as they left. The servants of the manor also looked exhausted, and as soon as they returned to their rooms in the courtyard, they immediately fell asleep. In a short while they were snoring loudly like dead pigs. Although the Khitan soldiers in the manor didn't do any work, they were also exhausted after being tossed around for so long. They had to monitor the work of the tenant farmers and servants, arrange for the rice carts to be loaded, and tie the captured mules and horses. When they thought about the long journey tomorrow morning, they also hurriedly rested. These servants of the manor had been very obedient these past few days. Now that the Khitan people were about to leave, they didn't believe that these servants would cause trouble at this time, so they inevitably relaxed their watch over them. Liang Shuang, who was pretending to be asleep, snored as she opened her eyes. Because of the hot weather, the doors and windows were open, so it was easy to see the situation outside. Seeing that the Khitan soldiers had indeed left, Liang Shuang jumped up. Beside her, Zhang Shihao, who was also sleeping in his clothes, immediately jumped up. Liang Shuang flashed to the door and quickly circled around in the shadow of the porch. After confirming that there were no Khitan soldiers in the courtyard, she immediately returned. At this time, the servants in the several side rooms in the courtyard were all awakened and gathered in the largest room. Among these people, only Zhang Shihao and Liang Shuang knew about tonight's operation. The other servants were all quietly awakened by Zhang Shihao. At this moment, they had a pair of hazy and confused, sleepy eyes, not knowing what was going on. Liang Shuang said in a low voice, "Right now, there are carriages and horses everywhere in the manor. This is the best opportunity for us to escape. In a while, we'll create a big mess and then take advantage of the chaos to escape." The servant of the manor, Dan, was startled by his words and said slowly, "Steward Liang, they'll leave early tomorrow morning. Why should we provoke them? These Khitan people are like wolves and tigers. If they get angry, we'll all be killed." Before Liang Shuang could say anything, Zhang Shihao sneered and said, Dan, you also know that they're bandits. Do you really think that after plundering the provisions, they'll leave peacefully? The servants understood the underlying meaning, and their faces couldn't help but change. Wang De anxiously asked, "Master Zhang, what do you mean by this?" Zhang Shihao said, "This morning, when their big boss went to find Steward Liang to arrange carriages and horses, Steward Liang overheard their conversation. They plan to kill everyone in the town when they leave early tomorrow morning." Everyone was shocked. Liang Shuang confirmed, "That's right. Their big boss told me to prepare carriages and horses to transport provisions." I agreed, but when I walked out, I remembered that there weren't enough mules and horses in the manor. I wanted to ask the big boss if he could gather the carriages and mules of the commoners in the town. When I turned around and walked to the door, I just happened to hear him instructing his trusted subordinates to kill all of us tomorrow. These ordinary servants didn't have much knowledge. When Steward Liang said this, they immediately believed it without a doubt. They couldn't help but be shocked and angry. Liang Shuang said, "From then on, I started to think about how to find a way for everyone to survive. If everyone doesn't dare to fight, then tomorrow morning, everyone will go see the King of Hell. Take advantage of the chaos in the manor tonight. Everyone set a fire and create a big mess. Then split up and break out. Maybe we can still find a way out. Do you understand?" The servants were so scared that they nodded their heads. Zhang Shihao said sternly, "Steward Liang is thinking of everyone's safety. Otherwise, with Steward Liang's martial arts, your chances of escaping will be higher. If we don't fight, we'll die. If we fight, there's still a chance. What do we have to be afraid of? Cowards without balls scram to the side and wait for death. If you're a man, then listen to Steward Liang's orders." The servants were furious. Dezhu said in a deep voice, "Steward Liang, just give your orders. Everyone will listen to you." Liang Shuang said, "Good. Shihao, in a while, you and a few brothers with good skills will go out and take care of the chitin scouts outside. Wang, Da, Go Sheng, Dezhu, Erdan, you guys follow behind and wait for an opportunity to set a fire. We'll stuff oil jars in each of the carriages. Once the fire starts, all the animals in the courtyard will go crazy. When the time comes, it'll be a mess and we'll be able to rush out." Liang Shuang had already thought of a plan. After making some arrangements, she said, "All of you go back to your rooms and wait. Continue pretending to be asleep. Don't let the chitin people notice. Shui, go and get the weapons we've hidden and distribute them to everyone. Everyone, listen to my orders and attack." The servants followed Liang Shuang's orders and quickly dispersed. However, Zhang Shihao purposely moved slowly and stayed at the back. After waiting for the servants to be used as cannon fodder to disperse, Liang Shuang said to Zhang Shihao in a low voice, "Once this is done, with young master's reward, you and I will be able to live a life of glory, splendor, wealth, and wealth. In a while, you and I will act according to the plan. We'll create chaos and light a big fire. We'll use the animals to cause chaos in the manor. When the servants run out of the manor and attract the chitin people's attention, you and I will sneak to Yang Fan's residence. He's injured. If we attack together, we'll definitely be able to kill him." Zhang Shihao said, "Good. When the time comes, the manor will be in chaos. Those chitin people will only think that we're trying to escape. Furthermore, Yang Fan isn't one of them. They won't even think that we're trying to capture their captive. Therefore, Yang Fan's defenses will definitely be lax. We'll definitely be able to succeed. Glory, splendor, wealth, and wealth will be at our fingertips." Liang Shuang said, "There's a secret room in this manor that can hide people. After Yang Fan dies, they'll only think that he was killed in the chaos. The chitin people will leave tomorrow morning. They won't stay in the manor just because a captive was killed. After we're done, you and I will first hide in the secret room. Once they leave, haha." Zhang Shihao originally thought that after he succeeded, he could only take advantage of the chaos to escape. It was only because of his loyalty to his young master and the generous reward that he wanted to take a gamble. Once he heard that there was a secret room in the manor that he could hide in, he immediately became even more excited. Head Steward's plan is truly thorough. Let's do it this way. Not long after, Zhou Shui came back with a pile of weapons of various lengths. These were all weapons that Liang Shuang had ordered people to hide when the chitin people occupied the town. Everyone in the room first picked out a weapon that suited them, then distributed the rest of the weapons to the manor servants who were still pretending to be asleep. Following Liang Shuang's arrangements, everyone quietly went outside. 2 chitin soldiers on night patrol wandered around for a long time. Their bodies were tired, so they found a cart filled with silk cloth and lay down on the soft silk cloth. Facing the starry sky, They hugged their long sabers and began to doze off. Zhang Shihao and another thug from the Liu family, who had decent martial arts skills, quietly observed for a while, using the messy grain carts in the courtyard as cover. They quietly approached the two of them. Behind them, at the Moon Gate, a few ordinary manor servants held fire torches in their chests and peeked at them. The two chitin soldiers leaned on the two sides of the cart, their bodies sleeping on the silk cloth. Their heads rested on the horizontal board beside the cart, their snores shaking the heavens. Zhang Shihao quietly went around to the other side of the cart, pulled out his short saber, and gestured to his companion. The two of them simultaneously covered the chitin soldier's mouth, and without hesitation, the sharp blade slit their throats. The bodies of the two chitin soldiers twitched violently a few times, then quickly went limp. Zhang Shihao waved his hand at the Moon Gate, and a few manor servants bent down and sneakily ran over through the gaps between the carts. Zhang Shihao quietly ordered, "Don't be in a hurry to light the fire. The two of us will first deal with the two chitin people at the courtyard entrance. After we kill them, you guys immediately light the carts one by one, then untie the horses and mules that are tied up in all directions. Find an opportunity to rush out." The manor servants nodded gratefully, although Steward Liang and this Master Zhang were people from the old mansion, and usually had their eyes on the top of their heads, not even sparing them a glance. At a critical moment, they did not run for their lives, but still remembered them. Such actions were enough to make these simple and honest manor people sincerely grateful. At the same time, Liang Shuang led another group of manor servants. Relying on their familiarity with the situation in the manor, they climbed over the low wall and leaped into another courtyard, beginning the same action. The Liu family manor was about to be thrown into chaos. Chapter 731. The night was dark, and the lamp was as small as a bean. Under the light of the lamp, Yang Fan carefully applied the ointment to the wound and changed it into a new piece of white cloth. This piece of white cloth had been boiled in water, so it was not as hard as before. After wrapping the wound layer by layer and wrapping it firmly, he blew out the lamp and lay down on the mat with his arms as a pillow. All the medicinal herbs from the pharmacy in town, whether useful or not, had been taken by Fei Mo, so Yang Fan could use the best ointment instead of chewing a bunch of medicinal herbs. During the day, the Chitinans had been busy preparing for their relocation. They lived in the mountains. Other than wood for fuel, there was nothing they did not lack. Therefore, they worked hard to move everything that could be moved into the wagons, including the iron pots. The courtyard was a mess during the day. Yang Fan was too lazy to go to the courtyard to sunbathe, so he just rested in his room. After a few intermittent naps, he was not too sleepy at night. Yang Fan used his arms as a pillow and quietly pondered. My injury has not healed yet. If I escape now, the possibility of successfully escaping is too small. In that case, I might as well pretend to be courteous for the time being. Ever since he saved Fei Mo's life, Fei Mo increasingly did not see him as an enemy. This was a good sign. When his body recovered, even if he had to escape from the mountains, he would be more confident than he was now. However, I have been missing for so long. Although the succession hall is a mess, I'm afraid the worst is at home. The imperial court does not lack a chief supervisor Yang. Taiping has the heavy burden of the country on his shoulders. Even if he is sad, he will quickly pull himself together. But Xiaoman and Anu will not be able to withstand such a heavy blow. Yang Fan sighed and touched his belt. In his belt, he had already written his message on a piece of white cloth with a charcoal strip. When he left tomorrow, he would find a chance to throw it to the people in town. The cloth promised a large profit. Even if there was only a 1 in 10,000 chance that the person who found it was willing to send it to the government, his family would have a chance to know that he was still alive. I'm afraid that an illiterate person found it. I'll take it back and wash it. Yes, that doctor, he must be literate. Before I leave tomorrow, I'll find an excuse to visit his house. Just as Yang Fan thought of this, he suddenly heard a faint shout. There's a fire! There's a fire! The car is on fire! Someone is running away! Soon after, countless cows mooed, horses neighed, and donkeys neighed. Yang Fan quickly sat up and stood up with his walking stick. As soon as he stood up, he heard a slight grunt from the courtyard. With Yang Fan's excellent hearing, he could vaguely hear the sound of a sharp weapon piercing into flesh. Yang Fan was secretly shocked and hurriedly walked towards the door. When his crutch landed on the ground, he purposely used a gentle force to avoid making a doo-doo sound. Just as Yang Fan reached the door, he noticed a flash of light in front of the door. It seemed that someone was coming. Yang Fan hurriedly moved to the side and hid by the wall. Almost at the same time, a figure with a knife hidden behind his elbow quickly dashed in. The person who rushed in was Zhang Shihao. The fire in the backyard had already been ignited, and shouts could be heard everywhere. If he was a bit late, Yang Fan would wake up. Although his leg was injured, it was better to act as soon as possible. Therefore, Zhang Shihao stepped into the room and ran towards the bed. Bang! Yang Fan swung his crutch and fiercely hit Zhang Shihao's head. Then he grabbed his collar and pulled Zhang Shihao's body back into his arms. At the same time, he nimbly flicked his crutch forward and caught the steel knife, preventing it from making a sound. Since this person had attacked the Khitan people, he didn't think that he was his enemy. However, he also didn't think that he could explain clearly who he was, why he was with the Khitan people, and other long-winded questions in a few words. He would first knock him out. Just as Yang Fan supported Zhang Shihao, he heard another muffled groan from outside. Then someone shouted in a low voice, "Hurry up! Remember to cut off Yang Fan's head!" Yang Fan's heart immediately trembled. He had never thought that the target of this group of assassins who were supposed to ambush the Khitan people was actually him. How was this possible? He had already fallen into the hands of the Khitan people as a captive. Just who was it that did not hesitate to launch a sneak attack on the Khitan people in order to kill him? At this time, the battle cries in the backyard were getting louder and louder. The entire manor was filled with the sounds of people shouting and horses neighing. "Hurry! If you're late!" Liang Shuang finished off a hidden guard in the other corner and rushed over to help. He had just hurriedly shouted into the room when a figure pounced out from the room, baring his fangs and brandishing his claws. Liang Shuang was shocked. He brandished his knife and slashed. With a "piu" sound, the steel knife slashed across the black figure's chest, causing blood to spurt out. Yang Fan threw the unconscious Zhang Shihao away like a hidden weapon. Then he picked up the steel knife with one hand and propped up his walking stick with the other, rushing out the door. Liang Shuang had just slashed Zhang Shihao to the side when a cold light flashed in front of his eyes. Another knife slashed at him. Yang Fan had made his move. Without saying anything, Yang Fan slashed at Liang Shihao's head. However, he did not aim at Liang Shuang's vital points, but at his shoulder. He still wanted to leave him alive. Liang Shuang was shocked and hastily dodged to the side. Yang Fan's right leg was injured, so his movements were not nimble enough. His injury affected his movements and slowed down, allowing him to escape the knife. Liang Shuang was shocked and said, "You're still alive." Yang Fan sneered and said, "Yang's life is not that easy to take." As they spoke, the sabers in their hands clashed 3 times in a row. Sparks flashed, and Yang Fan saw Liang Shuang's appearance. When Fei Mo gathered the local aristocrats, Yang Fan did not take a good look at their appearances. Later on, Liang Shuang was rarely allowed to come to the courtyard where Fei Mo lived. Yang Fan had never seen him, so even though he saw his appearance, he still did not know who he was. Just as Yang Fan was about to interrogate the other party about their origins, 6 or 7 Khitan men suddenly barged in from outside the courtyard, each holding a weapon and a torch. Someone in front of them shouted, Big Chieftain, the backyard." Seeing people fighting in the corridor, the Khitan soldiers were shocked and immediately surrounded them. Seeing this, Yang Fan's mind flashed, and he suddenly shouted, Quick! These people want to assassinate Leader Fei." Finished speaking, he kicked Zhang Shiheo's buttocks with his left foot, sending the corpse flying. With a slurp sound, the corpse slid 2 feet away from Fei Mo's door before stopping. Immediately, Yang Fan endured the pain and stood still. The cane in his right hand shot out like a poisonous dragon and struck Liang Shuang's genitals. At the same time, the steel knife in his left hand was a step faster and chopped at Liang Shuang's neck. Since things had come to this, he could not be left alive. He could only use him in other ways. Liang Shuang swung his knife diagonally, and with a clang sound, he parried the knife in Yang Fan's hand. Immediately, he felt a great pain in his crotch, so much so that he stopped breathing. Yang Fan's left hand was not as nimble as his right. He deliberately used the knife in his left hand as a bait, and the cane turned into a shadow, firmly striking Liang Shuang's genitals. Liang Shuang felt a pain in his balls. He really felt a pain in his balls because his balls were broken. Even the most venomous snake had a weak point. Those who practiced the iron skin technique also had a weak point. Even the strongest man would temporarily lose all his strength after receiving a heavy blow in this area. Liang Shuang's body was bent and his eyes were protruding out. He breathed in slowly but couldn't even inhale. Soon after, he was freed. Yang Fan followed up with another chop, separating his head from the source of the pain. Liang Shuang fell heavily to the ground and stared at his body with wide eyes. He was finally no longer in pain. Yang Fan rushed to the chitin soldiers in front of him and said, "Quickly go and see Leader Fei." When the chitin soldiers saw that the assassin had been killed by Yang Fan, they rushed to Fei Mo's residence like a swarm of bees and shouted, "Leader! Leader! I'm here." Fei Mo heard the shouts of his own people, and only then did he shakily crawl up from the ground. Shouts rang out from outside, followed by the sound of swords clashing in the courtyard. Fei Mo, who was in the middle of a drunken roar, was startled awake. He had been sleeping on his stomach after being shot in the buttocks. Yang Fan couldn't move, but he couldn't. When he heard the commotion, he hurriedly flipped over and fell under the bed. His buttocks hit, and it hurt like hell. Fei Mo didn't dare make a sound. He hurriedly pulled out his knife from under his pillow and lay there. If someone rushed in, he could only endure the pain and fight. After waiting bitterly for a long time, reinforcements finally came. Fei Mo didn't want his subordinates to see his embarrassing state, so he endured the pain and crawled back to the bed. Only then did he raise his voice and shout. A few chitin soldiers rushed into the room with torches in their hands and saw Leader Fei lying on the bed like a tortoise with a saber in one hand. He asked in an imposing manner, "Have you killed all the evildoers?" A few chitin soldiers said in unison, "Leader, let's go out and talk. The fire is about to reach us." At daybreak, the chitin soldiers packed up and began to leave the town. At the same time, the chitin soldiers stationed in Zhuolu and the surrounding villages also began to form up and set off. As they advanced, they gathered together. The riot that took place in the town last night was quickly quelled. None of the people who tried to rush out of the manor managed to escape. The one who managed to escape the furthest was shot to death by arrows, while the servants in the manor were chopped into meat paste by the enraged chitins. However, the damage they caused was not small. The entire manor was gone, burned to the ground, and several nearby families were implicated. Most of the food, cloth, clothes, and bedding that had been plundered from the town and gathered in the manor were burned. Only the dozen or so carriages in the front yard were rescued in time and didn't suffer too much damage. However, when those carriages were pulled along the road, one could occasionally see green smoke rising from some of the carriages. Fei Mo was lying on a large carriage with a simple shed on it. Beside him was Yang Fan. The arrow wound on Yang Fan's leg had also ruptured during the fierce battle last night. Yang Fan asked, "This manor belongs to the Fanyang Lu family?" Fei Mo said, "That's right. Damn it, the Fanyang Lu family is indeed worthy of being the overlord of the north." They actually have such guts with just a few servants in the manor. Yang Fan secretly took a deep breath. He finally understood. Fei Mo cursed angrily for a while, then suddenly looked at Yang Fan and asked, "Why did you save me?" Yang Fan pondered for a moment and said, "I hope that you can make a bigger fuss. The more you make a fuss, the more beneficial it will be for the restoration of Li Tang. Now that the crown prince has been appointed marshal, it's a good sign, but it's not enough." Fei Mo spat at him. "Pooey, am I that important? You've saved me twice. Other than this reason, is there nothing else?" Yang Fan laughed and said, "What else? You're a thief and I'm an official. Don't tell me you think I'm treating you as a brother?" Fei Mo laughed. "I say, why don't you stay and be my strategist? How about that?" "I won't do it." "Do you believe that I won't kill you? Is this how you repay your benefactor?" "Damn you!" Fei Mo angrily cursed, then shut her mouth and continued to play the turtle. Chapter 732. The various Khitan troops gradually gathered together and began marching east. At noon, the large group stopped in a mess. After lunch, they were about to continue on their way when Sun Wanrong suddenly issued a general order. Thus, only about 10,000 soldiers who had suffered minor injuries in the previous battles were allowed to stay. The rest of the troops were separated from the main group. Yang Fan sat in the carriage and saw countless cavalry rolling south. As the army galloped past, the dust they stirred up was like a dark cloud that filled the sky. Yang Fan revealed a slightly alarmed expression and subconsciously asked, "What happened?" Fei Mo chuckled, his face revealing a cunning expression that contrasted with his rough and honest appearance. "The Grand Marshal has led the troops south to attack Ji Province." "What?" Yang Fan's heart skipped a beat. "Aren't we returning to the mountains?" Fei Mo said lazily. The Khan suffered a heat stroke and has been feeling unwell ever since. This time he's leading us to escort the rations back to the mountains. As for the Grand Marshal, do you think there aren't a few spies from the imperial court in such a huge Shualu city? The Khan deliberately spread the news of his return to the mountains to confuse the soldiers. Yang Fan was speechless for a moment before saying, "With the main force heading south and only a small force to escort the Khan back to the mountains, aren't you afraid that the imperial court's army will intercept you while escorting so many supplies?" Fei Mo laughed out loud. "Haha, if they really chase after us, we can just abandon the rations and leave. We can then take down another city and raid their homes. However, do you really think that Wu Yi will send troops? If he has the guts, he would have long come in the few days we stayed in Zhuelu." Ha ha ha. Although the one leading the troops was Wu Yi, as a member of the court, when Yang Fan heard Fei Mo's impudent and contemptuous smile, he couldn't help but feel ashamed. Tens of thousands of Khitan cavalrymen belonging to different tribes immediately left their ranks the moment the word south was given. It appeared to be a complete mess. However, the Khitan cavalrymen did not need to form up like the Han cavalrymen, using banners and drums to organize themselves. Through their training in hunting and encirclement since they were young, it was almost as if it was instinctive for them. Amidst the chaos, they naturally regrouped and lined up according to the banners of the various tribes, forming a very effective marching formation. In the evening, they stopped by a small river. Sun Wanrong rode a large horse and stood at the very front of the formation, quietly watching his army. The magnificent army slowly quietened down in front of him, like a towering mountain, a heavy and majestic aura rushing towards him. Sun Wanrong nodded in satisfaction and shouted, "I will pretend to return to the mountain to deceive the Tang army. The Tang will not be on guard. Today, the entire army will only carry 2 days' rations and travel day and night straight to Jizhou. Even if the Tang have cavalry scouts, we will let them chase behind us and see our blue wolf war flag planted on top of Jizhou's city wall." His hand slowly reached to his waist and suddenly pulled out a slightly curved Turkic long saber with a clang. He gently kicked the horse's abdomen with both legs, and the war horse ran horizontally in front of the neat formation like a wall. We must take Jizhou. There is nothing we cannot conquer. We must take Jizhou. There is nothing we can't conquer. We must take Jizhou. There is nothing we can't conquer. Tens of thousands of Khitan cavalrymen shouted in unison. The gathered sound waves were earth-shattering and earth-shattering. In a distant birch forest, countless birds flew up in fright and circled in the sunset sky. Sun Wanrong suddenly turned his horse and slashed his long saber towards the south. He shouted with all his might, "Continue forward!" The magnificent army was like a raging tide bursting through a dam, crushing the small river in front of them and rolling south. To the south, continue south. Under the southern sky, the sunset was dyed red like blood. The cavalry that covered the sky quickly merged with the dark red sunset. In the evening in Luoyang, there were not many pedestrians on the long streets because it was almost time to close the doors. Occasionally, there were some pedestrians who returned home late, but they were also in a hurry. On the side of the Tianjin Bridge, a group of people slowly approached. The surrounding guards were the Featherwood Guards, who were clad in bright armor and looked extremely formidable. The group in the middle were the Turks with curly hair and sharp noses. The warden of the Chamberlain of Dependencies, Lu Ruiyu, had a wooden and expressionless face as she silently accompanied the Turks forward. Only when they reached the guest house of the Turks did she turn her head and lightly say, "Envoy, please return to the guest house to rest. If you have any needs, you can bring them up to the guest house official." The Turk envoy was a short and burly man in his early 40s. He had a crooked beard and an arrogant expression on his face, but his eyes were shrewd and crafty. In the face of Lu Ruiyu's disrespectful attitude, the Turk envoy was not offended in the slightest. He only smiled faintly and replied in Han with a foreign accent, "Thank you for your trouble, Jianke Lu. We do not have any other needs. We only hope that your esteemed emperor can give us an answer as soon as possible. Our Kagan's patience is not very good." Lu Ruiyu's expression changed. With a heavy snort, she turned her horse around and galloped away. The Turk envoy smiled proudly and dismounted. He walked towards the post house with legs that were a little worn out from riding. In the hall of martial accomplishment, the prime ministers and several important officials of the court were still seated and had yet to leave the palace. Wu Zetian's face was filled with fatigue, but her extreme anger caused her aged face to be filled with dignity. Preposterous! This is preposterous! Silk, farming tools, seeds, steel, medicinal herbs, agricultural books, medical books, and that's not all. He even wants the surrendered families of the 6 prefectures and the Chanyu Protectorate. This Moshe is truly audacious. I haven't even settled the score with him for the invasion, and he dares to be so greedy. The Qilin Pavilion Junior Supervisor, Li Jiao, solemnly said, "Your Majesty, if we agree to the Turks' conditions, Moshe will be able to obtain the manpower, farmland, and agricultural resources. The Turks will become even more powerful. Furthermore, the Turks are greedy and untrustworthy. Even if we give them these conditions, they will not be able to obtain peace. I believe that we should strengthen our military to prevent their attacks." Li Jiao was also a member of the faction that protected the heir to the throne. He supported the current crown prince, Li Dan. Thus, when Wei Yuanzhong and Yao Chong became prime ministers, he was immediately pulled into the political circle. His words were naturally the intentions of Wei Yuanzhong and Yao Chong. The current situation was still unclear. Although the emperor was furious, his true intentions were still uncertain. It was best for him to make the first move. Wu Zetian appointed Crown Prince Li Dan as the marshal and Di Renjie as the deputy marshal. She sent troops to the western region to suppress the Turks. When the Turks heard that the imperial court had sent more troops, and that it was the highly respected Di Renjie who was the commander, they raised the banner of Crown Prince Li Dan and received the support of their people. Their morale was extremely high, and they were worried that they would be at a disadvantage. So they immediately retreated. Di Renjie could not catch up to them and did not have the confidence to fight a battle. Thus, he only stationed his troops at the border to prevent a counterattack from the Turks. At the same time, he helped the affected people rebuild their homes. The two sides were in a stalemate. At this time, the Tubo Empire was in chaos and the kings were fighting for power. The Turks had lost an ally and were unwilling to fight a battle with the imperial court. However, Moshe was unwilling to give up this good opportunity. Thus, he sent an envoy to the capital to propose a peace treaty with the empress. His conditions were that he would recognize Wu Zetian as his adoptive mother and was willing to marry his daughters to the kings of the imperial court, forming a father-son relationship with the imperial court. At the same time, he also asked for a large amount of silk, farming tools, seeds, ironware, and even medical books and herbs from the imperial court. Not only that, he also asked for the Turks who surrendered to the Tang dynasty in the Heku 6 provinces and the territory of the Chanyu Protectorate. There were more than 8,000 households in the Heku 6 provinces. A household had about 5 to 6 people, which meant that there were about 40 to 50,000 people in each household. Each household had at least one strong man, which meant that there were almost 10,000 warriors who were skilled in horsemanship and archery. Most importantly, these Khitans surrendered to the imperial court of their own accord. If they were pushed to Moshe, how would the people of the world view the Great Zhou? There were more than 1 or 2 such dependent tribes. The Chanyu Protectorate was one of the 6 most important protectorates established during the Tang dynasty. It belonged to the Guanyi Road, and its territory was between the Great Desert to the north and the Yellow River to the south. If he really agreed, the Turks would be able to graze sheep right under Wu Zetian's nose. Wu Zetian looked at Yang Zaisi and asked, "Yang Zaisi, what do you think?" Yang Zaisi hurriedly said, "I think that Moshe is willing to give his son to his mother and marry his daughter to the kings of the dynasty. He is very respectful towards your majesty. However, they want the 6 provinces to surrender, the Chanyu Protectorate and the Great Zhou to abandon their people. Such a request is simply the words forfeiting sovereignty and humiliating the country were at the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed them back down and swiftly changed them to they're simply insatiably greedy. This subject believes that if we agree, it will only encourage the ambitions of the Turks. We should sternly refuse." Yao Chong heard his ambiguous words and could not help but angrily said, "Not only should we not allow them to abandon their people, we should also not allow them to give us silk, seeds, farming tools, ironware, agricultural books, and medical books. This is giving money to the enemy. The Turks have taken advantage of the unrest in the north to invade our borders and kill our people. Now, we are talking about peace and not punishing them, but the court wants to give them so many resources. How can there be such a reason in the world?" Nayan Lujia worriedly said, "What Prime Minister Yao says is reasonable, but although Master D's troops seem strong, they are mostly untrained recruits. Master D himself has never led an army in battle and lacks battle experience. If Moshe decides to invade the east again, with the Khitan bandits running rampant and the smoke of war rising in the northwest, I'm afraid," hearing this, Wu Zetian could not help but frown. She somewhat regretted listening to Zhou Xing's words and killing He Qi Changji. He Qi Changji had never suffered a defeat against the Turks, and the Turks feared him the most. If he was still alive, Moshe would not have dared to demand such an exorbitant price, and the 160,000 soldiers would not have been wiped out by the yellow deer. But that hateful Wu Yi only defended his city in the north and did not dare to fight the enemy, watching as the Khitans rampaged through Hebei and caused trouble everywhere. Otherwise, he could have transferred troops from the north to join the Helan Corps. At that time, Moshe would not have dared to take advantage of the situation, and the court would not have been forced to let the Turks extort them. After thinking for a long time, Wu Zetian's anger subsided, and she deeply sighed, saying, "Let's first stabilize the Turkic envoys and delay for time. Quickly send an edict to Wu Yi and have him send troops to fight the enemy and eliminate the Khitan rebels as soon as possible. Chapter 733. The general in charge of escorting the supplies back to the mountain stronghold was called Qi Ding, a trusted aide of the Khitan Supreme, Khan Li Jinzhong. Since it was announced that the Khan was ill and needed to return to the mountain to recuperate, it was only normal for him to leave behind a trusted general to protect him. More than 10,000 people, coupled with a large number of horses and mules, was also a mighty procession. Qi Ding needed to command the whole army, especially the carriage in which Li Jinzhong's body was hidden. He almost never left it, so Yang Fan had never seen him. In fact, with more than 10,000 soldiers escorting so many supplies, Wu Yi only needed to send a group of light cavalry. Even if they could not annihilate them, they could still seize the supplies. Even if they could not seize it, they could force the Khitans to burn the supplies, which would be a heavy blow to the Khitans. Fei Emo might have said it casually, saying that things could be seized again if they were lost. In fact, attacking cities and seizing strongholds was not an easy task for a cavalry unit that specialized in roaming and maneuverability. If they could starve the Khitans of food and clothing, they would only have to wait until winter. Just the howling of the north wind would be enough to decimate the Khitans and greatly weaken them. If not for the fact that Sun Wanrong knew that news of the Khan's death could not be hidden for long and that he needed to win a few major battles while morale of the army was still stable to establish his authority, he would not have taken such a risk and allowed Qi Ding to lead such a weak force to escort the supplies back to the mountain. However, after traveling for 7 to 8 days, they did not encounter a single Zhou army. Fei Mo was immensely proud, but Yang Fan was disgraced. The battle at Huangbua had truly displayed the might of the Khitans. In this battle, they had cleverly exploited the arrogance of the Zhou army, and the advantageous terrain had played an important role. But in the eyes of the Zhou people, they only saw that the Khitans had fought this battle with even more prestige than the Turks and Tubo. The extreme contempt they had for the Khitans immediately turned into extreme panic. They had overestimated the fighting strength of the Khitans. As a result, Wu Yi, who had more than 100,000 soldiers, did not even dare to challenge this easily defeated grain convoy. Gu Zhuting and Anu were still dressed as master and servant, returning from Horse City with a convoy on their way to Thousand Gold City. One of the defeated soldiers got lost in the mountains and wandered for more than half a month before he finally found his way out and escaped to Horse City. These days in the mountains, he could only eat mountain fruits and small animals to fill his stomach. He was not a hunter, so it was not easy for him to catch a small animal. He was so hungry that he was emaciated. He fainted as soon as he reached Horse City. However, before he fainted, he was asked for his name. He said his name was Yang Fan. Gu Zhuting and the men sent by Anu to search for Yang Fan's whereabouts at Horse City treated him as if he had found a treasure and immediately guarded him. Because his body was too weak and in urgent need of treatment, they dared not move him too much and only sent men to Thousand Gold Smelting City to report the news. When Anu and Gu Zhuting heard the news, they immediately rushed from Thousand Gold Smelting City. However, they were disappointed when they saw him. Although this man was exhausted and had lost his body shape, Anu was familiar with Yang Fan. His facial features, height, and physique were not that different, so she could tell that this was just a person with the same name. These days, Anu had met more than one person with the same name as Yang Fan. Some were alive, some were dead, but no matter if they were alive or dead, they were not the Yang Fan she was looking for. Therefore, every time she met them, all she got was sadness. Gu Zhuting said you should be happy. There is no news about the sovereign. Doesn't that mean he is still alive? Anu asked in return, if he is still alive, why is there no news about him? It doesn't make sense that those pawns who only know some ordinary martial arts have all returned as long as they are still alive, but his whereabouts are still unknown. In fact, Anu hoped that Yang Fan was safe and sound more than anyone else. But because of her concern for him, the most terrifying result would always be lingering in her mind. When she was in Thousand Gold Smelting City, every day, she would see corpses being sent into the corpse smelting furnace, and her mind would always be filled with the gruesome scenes. It had tortured her to the point that she was emaciated and exhausted. As the caravan moved forward, a steward hired by Gu Zhuting raised his horsewhip and pointed into the distance. "Look, there is a troop coming." Anu and the others went to Horse City, but they could not find Yang Fan. So, on the way back, they bought a batch of coal and urns from Horse City. These things were consumed too quickly. The amount of coal and urns needed for the cremation of more than 100,000 people was huge. Even if the shops they ordered were to produce at full capacity, they would not be able to meet the demand in a short time. After buying these things, they hired a dozen large carriages from the locals, and this steward was the leader of the carriages. Gu Zhuting looked up and saw a group of cavalrymen galloping over from the horizon. She did not pay them any mind and said indifferently, "They are probably the soldiers who are taking in the rebels." In recent days, there were often generals from the imperial court going to the cities and towns to take in the fleeing rebels, so they were not surprised anymore. This place was very close to 1,000 Gold Smelting City, and they did not think of any possibility other than the soldiers. However, that group of people was getting closer and closer. They didn't raise any flags, but as they got closer, their clothes could be seen clearly. The workers transporting the coal couldn't help but exclaim, "It's the Khitans! They are the Khitans!" The Khitans transported the supplies eastward. At first, they tried their best to avoid the cities to avoid being harassed by the soldiers. But along the way, they found that the Zhou army was scared out of their wits. Under Wu Yi's strict orders, the cities only held back their troops, so they gradually became bolder. Now, they were getting closer to their destination, and the surroundings were getting more and more desolate. There were only Horse City and 1,000 Gold Smelting City, two small cities that could not hold a large number of troops, so they became even more unrestrained and swaggered over. By the time Gu Zhuting and the others realized that the riders were Khitans, it was already too late for them to hide. A few of the charcoal workers were so frightened that they instinctively wanted to run, but it was impossible for them to escape with the charcoal carriages. After a moment of confusion, the carriages and horses blocked the road in disorder, so they were stuck there and could not move. "Everyone, don't move. We are just businessmen. As long as we do not resist, they will not do anything to us." Gu Zhuting raised her voice and ordered loudly. Anu quietly pressed down on the sword at her waist. Seeing these Khitans, she thought of Yang Fan, whose whereabouts were unknown. In her eyes, every Khitan was a mortal enemy. She wanted nothing more than to chop these people into meat paste. Anu. Gu Zhuting saw Anu's strange expression and immediately warned her. Anu slowly let out a breath and loosened her grip on the sword. When the Khitan soldiers saw this caravan, a group of cavalry immediately galloped over and surrounded them. They galloped happily on their horses and laughed at the panicked workers. After a while, a large group of people came over and protected a heavily guarded carriage. They passed right in front of this group of people who were obviously merchants, not even sparing them a glance. A man who looked like a general rode his horse over and shouted, "What are they doing?" A Khitan soldier answered, "It's a group of merchants." The general's face lit up. He waved his hand and said, "Search their carriage and see what they are transporting." Yes. Immediately, two soldiers dismounted from their horses and walked over with sabers in their hands. They shouted, "All of you, get off the carriage. Get off the horses. What are you doing?" Gu Zhuting patted Anu's arm and took the lead to get off the horse. She put on a flattering smile and said, "Lord General, we are just doing small business. The carriage is transporting some coal and charcoal to 1,000 Gold Smelting City. It's nothing valuable. Lord General, please be magnanimous and have mercy on us. Transporting coal." Hearing this, the Khitan man lost interest. The thing they lacked the least in the mountains was firewood, so there was no need for them to waste their energy transporting charcoal into the mountains. He walked around the carts and looked at them. Seeing the jars tied with straw ropes, he couldn't help asking, "What's inside?" The chief steward, who happened to be standing next to the carriage, answered while trembling, "Lord General, these are empty jars. There's nothing inside." The chitin soldier didn't believe him. He flipped his saber and smashed 2 jars with the back of the saber. Sure enough, they were empty. He couldn't help but be disappointed and said angrily, "Mother ***, why are you transporting so many empty jars?" The chief steward was cautious. He was afraid that he would say they were for the dead Joe soldiers and make the chitin soldier unhappy. His life and death depended on the other party's mood. He quickly answered with a bitter face, "This old man is just a businessman. If the customer wants to buy it, we sell it. As for what the customer wants to buy it for, we don't have the right to ask." "Mother ***, are you saying I talk too much?" The chitin soldier gave him a hard shove. The chief steward staggered a few steps and fell on but the chitin soldier couldn't help but laugh when he saw his sorry state. At this time, under the protection of the soldiers, another carriage drove over. This carriage paled in comparison to the magnificent carriage from before. The awning on top of the carriage was a temporary one. It was unknown how long they had been on the road, but the awning was about to collapse. The carriage swayed as it moved and was only barely supported by the ropes on 4 long poles. The carriage was simple and crude. It was just a carriage used by ordinary farmers to transport grain and firewood. The carriage was piled with cloth and clothes. Inside there were 2 people, one sitting and one lying on the ground. One of them was Fay-Mo could now lie on his side. He was lying on his side with one hand propping up his hairy cheeks. He looked like a sleeping Arhut with his eyes closed. Yong Fan was sitting next to him. He had made a nest out of the cloth and was lazily leaning against it. He was looking at the trapped passers-by. Yong Fan saw that the group of people was a group of passing merchants who were surrounded by the chitin soldiers and looked very pitiful. He raised his voice and called out, "You Fu, why are you fighting with a group of people who are just trying to make a living? They're all poor people and their lives aren't easy. Let them go." These days, Fay-Mo really didn't treat Yong Fan as an outsider. They ate and slept together. Although he didn't say it out loud, he actually treated Yong Fan as his brother. Yu Fu was the leader of the group of cavalry that trapped Anu and the others. He was Fay-Mo's nephew. Because of Fay-Mo's attitude towards Yong Fan, his subordinates also became respectful towards Yong Fan. That was why Yong Fan tried to dissuade them. Anu, who was disguised as a servant, stood beside Gu Zhuting. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, and she didn't even raise her head. She was afraid that if her eyes revealed uncontrollable hatred, it would attract the attention of these chitin soldiers. As soon as Yong Fan's voice entered her ears, Anu's heart jumped so fast that it hurt a little. She suddenly raised her head and stared at the person speaking in the carriage. With one glance, she was so happy that she was about to explode. Chapter 734. Haha, you've met a benefactor today. All right, I won't talk to you anymore. Quickly get lost. Yu Fu saw that these people really didn't have much to gain, and with Yong Fan putting in a good word for them, he generously agreed. As if they had been granted amnesty, the workers hurriedly bowed and expressed their gratitude. However, the chitin army was crossing the road, so they couldn't leave for a while. At this time, Fay-Mo lazily opened his eyes. He had heard everyone's conversation just now, but he was still half asleep and a little sleepy, so he was too lazy to respond. At this time he looked at the charcoal caravan and lazily ordered, "The people can leave. Don't make it difficult for them, but leave the carriages and horses behind. Push all the junk on the carriages down. Yu Fu, move the things on the carriages that are about to fall apart over here." "Yes, uncle," Yu Fu answered, waved the long knife in his hand, and glared at the workers. "Did you all hear that? Quickly move the charcoal and jars off the carriages. Hurry up!" The goods on the carriages all belonged to Gu Zhuting, the big merchant. The workers only wanted to live, so how could they be reluctant? They hurriedly worked hard to move the goods off the carriages. However, they remembered that they had received money from Gu Zhuting, so they couldn't really push the jars down and break them. Thus, they moved the goods carefully. The drivers, on the other hand, had bitter expressions. The carriages and animals were their tools to make a living. If they were taken away, how could they live in the future? But in front of the chitin swords, how could they have the courage to say anything? Anu stood there and stared at Yang Fan in a daze. She didn't even blink. Tears quickly blurred her eyes, and then large teardrops flowed down her cheeks and gathered on her pointed chin. She didn't think that Yang Fan was still alive. He really was still alive. Seeing Yang Fan sitting in the carriage, Anu was so happy that her heart was about to explode. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, but she let the tears flow freely, venting her longing and infinite joy. Fortunately, Anu was now dressed as a servant. Once a woman dressed as a man, her age immediately seemed to be much younger, so at this time she looked like a half-grown boy. Therefore, when her tears were seen by others, they only thought that she was shocked and scared, and did not have much suspicion. The car that Yang Fan was in did not stop. When he called out to Yu Fu, the car was crossing the main road. When Fei Mo finished, the car had already gone down the wilderness. Although Yang Fan wanted to save these pitiful passers-by, he couldn't say anything since Fei Mo had given the order. Even if the disguised Anu stood in front of him at this time, if she did not take the initiative to reveal her identity, he would at most feel a strange sense of familiarity from her, but he would never recognize that she was Anu. Not to mention that he did not seriously look at Anu from the beginning to the end. However, Anu's eyes seemed to be pulled by a pair of invisible threads, constantly chasing after his figure. When the car that Yang Fan was in left the main road, Anu subconsciously wanted to chase after it, but her arm was immediately grabbed by Gu Zhuting. Anu raised her blurred and teary eyes. Gu Zhuting shook her head at her with a solemn expression and said in a low voice, "Sovereign is still alive. This is a joyous occasion. It will be easier for us if we know where he went. But at this time, we must not act rashly." Anu also knew that this was not the time to go forward and recognize him. Now it seemed that Yang Fan's life was not in danger, and his relationship with the chitin people was quite good. She did not know how he formed a friendship with the enemy of life and death. However, if she wanted to act rashly, she was afraid that she would harm him. At least the chitin people would raise their vigilance, and it would not be easy to rescue him again. She could only suppress her anxiety and stand still. The carriage rumbled. Sitting in the carriage, Yang Fan secretly sighed in his heart. He estimated that in another half a month's time, his leg injury would be completely healed, but by that time he would definitely be deep in the mountains. Yang Fan thought to himself, the road into the mountains took a total of 3 days. When I recover from my injury, as long as I bring enough food, I may not be unable to walk out. Although it is easy to get lost in the mountains, it will not be easy for them to chase after me. On the main road, the charcoal and jars on the carriage were all moved down. Under the orders of the chitin people, the workers used all their strength to move the grain and cloth from the carriages that were about to fall apart from the long journey onto these carriages. They could only watch helplessly as the chitin people drove the carriages and quickly chased after the main group of people. The chief steward and the other carriage handlers made some calculations and walked together to Gu Zhuting's side. The chief steward rubbed his hands and said with an embarrassed expression, "Boss, look at this mess. They have thousands of men and horses, and they have sabers and swords in their hands. We don't dare to resist, but in the end." Gu Zhuting coldly watched the chitin troops leave into the distance. She casually said to the chief steward, "Don't worry, this matter cannot be blamed on you. I won't mind." The chief steward's expression stiffened. He was so embarrassed that he didn't know what to say. One of the handlers was impatient. Seeing the chief steward's embarrassment, he couldn't help but say, "Boss, your things are all on the ground. When we moved them, we were very careful and didn't damage much. Later on, We can find some more carriages to move them away. But our carriages and our horses… Boss, what do you think? Another handler also said with a sullen face, That's right, boss. Those are our livelihood. We were transported goods for boss, and that's why we were robbed by the Khitan people. We poor people all have parents, wives, and children to support. What should we do now? He also knew that there was no reason for them to be responsible for his losses. He just felt that this boss was very generous. Moreover, he was doing good deeds in 1,000-gold smelting city. Since he was so rich, he might as well say that he was pitiful, and maybe he could get some compensation. Only then did Gu Zhuting understand what they meant. She quickly took out a money pouch from her bosom. Without counting, she stuffed the money pouch into the chief steward's hand and said, You guys split it. The jars and charcoal on the ground are also yours. Anu, let's catch up. After saying that, Gu Zhuting pressed her hand on the horse's back. Her whole body became as light as a feather, and she floated onto the horse's back. The horse lowered its head to eat the grass and didn't notice anything. This kind of skill was really brilliant. Anu was also startled awake by her call. She immediately leaped onto the war horse, pulled the reins, and rushed down the main road. Gu Zhuting said anxiously, Anu, slow down. Stay far away. Don't let them find out. After saying that, she put her legs on the stirrups and followed after her. In the wilderness, thousands of soldiers and horses passed by. The ruts and hoof prints were clear. She wasn't afraid of losing them. The chief steward turned pale with fright. He held the money pouch and shouted, Boss, boss! If it's up to me, forget it. Boss, don't chase after them. Boss. Gu Zhuting and Anu turned a deaf ear to him. In a short while, they were already far away. The chief steward stamped his feet and sighed, Boss is a good person, but how can you give up your life and not your wealth? After Li Jinzhong died of illness, Sun Wanrong knew that his prestige and unity among the people was far from Li Jinzhong's. He was afraid that the news would leak out and the morale of the army would be out of control. And once the army returned to the mountains, it would be impossible to keep this secret. At this time, the Khitan people were far from having a strict class and system like the Han people. They couldn't isolate a ruler from his people for a long time and let everyone believe that he was still alive. Therefore, Sun Wanrong decided to hide the news of Li Jinzhong's death first, and then order the light cavalry to go out to battle in the name of Li Jinzhong. Therefore, after he released the news that he had seized the grain and returned to the mountains, he only led the light cavalry to quickly travel south day and night and took down Jizhou as fast as lightning. After conquering Jizhou in order to expand his influence, he ordered a massacre. Liu Baoji, the provincial governor of Jizhou, and thousands of officers and soldiers were killed. The provisions could not be transported away, so they were all burned. Then, without stopping, he went to attack Hejin County. The whole of Hebei was shocked. The news was quickly reported to the capital. Wu Zetian was also shocked when she heard the news. At this time, the court and the Turks were negotiating for peace. In fact, the Turks were not optimistic about the Khitan people. Now that the court was fighting in the north, they couldn't keep up with the latest battle reports. Therefore, they didn't dare to push the court too hard and were anxious to complete the peace negotiations. With both sides having their own concerns, the basic conditions for the peace negotiations had been agreed. Wu Zetian agreed that Prince Wuzhou would marry Moshe's daughter as his princess consort. Moshe would be given the title of Great General of the Left Guards and Qianshan Khan. In addition, he would be given gold, jewels, jade, silk, grain, and farming tools. However, he would never agree to the condition of ceding land to the abandoned people. Now, the two sides were only divided on the amount of gifts. When the news that Sun Wanrong had taken down Jizhou came, Wu Zetian panicked. She quickly instructed the office of the Grand Herald and the Turks to discuss again. At the same time, she tightly sealed off the news that the court had suffered another defeat. The officer from the office of the Grand Herald knew that if he suddenly changed his attitude and agreed to the Turks' conditions, it would arouse their suspicions. These Hu barbarians were cunning and not easy to deceive. Thus, he patiently negotiated with the Turks for 2 more days, slowly making concessions before finally agreeing to the other side's conditions. The court agreed to the terms of the truce: 40,000 dendrograms of grain, 50,000 bolts of silk, 3,000 farming tools, 40,000 gene of iron, a batch of agricultural and medical books, 20 carts of medicinal herbs, 1,000 taels of gold, and 10 buckets of pearls as betrothal gifts. The Turk envoy obtained his wish, and the 2 sides signed a letter of credence. Soon after, the envoy gleefully accompanied Wu Yanxiu, who was preparing to become the Turk's son-in-law, back to the Turks with all the gifts. After the Turk envoy was sent away, the court immediately began to discuss the matter of sending more troops to Hebei. The news of the Khitans' constant invasion of the south made the entire court feel threatened. The Turks and Tibetans in particular were constantly using the carrot and stick to extort benefits from the court, causing the court to be greatly troubled. All the factions believed that the Khitan rebellion should be swiftly quelled. In these circumstances, the entire Wuzhou imperial court could be said to be of one mind, unprecedentedly united. Wu Zetian appointed the new Minister of War and Prime Minister Wang Xiaojie, whom she had originally intended to send back to the 4 garrisons of Anqi to deal with the Tibetans, as the marshal of the northern expedition. General Su Honghu of the Featherwood Guard was appointed as the deputy marshal, and she began to mobilize troops against the Khitans. This time, because the imperial court had made peace with the Turks, Wu Zetian believed that there was no more fighting on the Western Front. As a result, she transferred nearly 80,000 soldiers from the various regions of Heilong, as well as from the prefectural army and another portion of soldiers. In the end, she assembled an army of 180,000 soldiers. Wang Xiaojie's army was the 3rd army the Wuzhou imperial court had dispatched to the northern frontier. In order to quell the rebellion of the tiny Khitan, the 1st army, Chao Runshi, had been completely wiped out, and the 2nd army, Wu Yi, had closed the city walls. The imperial court could only place its hopes on this famous general who had reclaimed the 4 garrisons of Anqi. Wang Xiaojie, with his 180,000 soldiers and the hopes of the empress and all the officials of the court, raised the war banner and set off for Hebei. At this time, the geese were returning to the south, the golden wind was refreshing, and the chill of autumn was beginning to set in. Chapter 735. In the mountains, there was a small stream winding down from the cloud-shrouded summit. In the dense forest, there were many weeds and shrubs growing on both sides of the stream. The wild branches of the shrubs weighed heavily on the surface of the water, swaying uncontrollably. A little girl tied a tattered red dress around her waist and carried a basket in her hand as she followed an older boy upstream. In some places the water was very shallow, and in some places there was a small waterfall. The water would flow faster, and the bottom of the waterfall would also be deeper. The little girl's dress clearly did not fit her. It was probably taken back by the Khitan soldiers when they attacked the city. It was a young girl's dress, and it was a little loose on her body. After being splashed by the water, her movements became even more clumsy, but she still carefully protected the small basket in her hand. This scene was leisurely and beautiful, like a paradise that stood aloof from worldly affairs. Yang Fan and Fei Emo sat on a large rock by the river, smiling at them. The bandage on Yang Fan's leg had already been removed, and he was lifting up his robe to let the sun shine on his thigh. The arrow wound had basically healed, and there was a tender red scar on it. Only the center of the wound still had a black scab that had not fallen off. "Your wound is almost healed, right?" Fei Mo's gaze fell on Yang Fan's wound, and she suddenly smiled inexplicably. "You don't need to always observe how many open and hidden sentries we have on the periphery, and you don't need to beat around the bush to find out the way from those children. When you recover, I'll send you off." Yang Fan suddenly turned his head and looked at her in shock. Fei Emo said with a smile, "Do you think I'm a fool and can't see that you want to escape?" Yang Fan sighed and said, "Aren't you afraid that your Kogan will cause trouble for you if you let me go?" Fei Emo rubbed the back of her neck and smiled. "What's the use of keeping you alive? You've saved my life twice, and I've spared your life. This is called distinguishing kindness and hatred. Khan won't chop off my head for this, will he?" Yang Fan was silent for a moment before he smiled bitterly. "That's because I'm a vile person in vain. If I had known that you would let me go, I wouldn't have needed to make so many preparations." Fei Emo chuckled. Yang Fan also laughed. After laughing for a while, the wrinkles on his face gradually disappeared. He said in a low voice, "There is something that I shouldn't say, but I still have to advise you, whether it's for yourself or for your clansmen. Think of a way out as soon as possible." Fei Emo said disapprovingly, "Retreat? Do you think we'll lose?" Yang Fan said seriously, "It's not that I think you will lose, but you will definitely lose." Just as Fei Emo was about to open her mouth, Yang Fan raised his hand to stop her. "When you fight a war, you need money, food, and reinforcements. That's right, you've won a few battles for now. But these few victories can't guarantee that you'll win forever. Until now, you don't even have your own base. When the fire is at its strongest, it's also when the firewood is about to run out." Fei Emo wanted to say something, but hesitated. Finally, he angrily picked up a piece of wood. It was a piece of rotten wood that had washed up on the cliff during the flash flood. Fei Emo forcefully snapped the piece of wood into two and loudly said, "We won't lose! We won't lose!" Fei Emo patted his butt and turned to leave. Yang Fan looked at his back and sighed softly. When he turned back, his body suddenly tensed up. The half of the tree that had been snapped by Fei Emo was bent like a hook. Yang Fan grabbed it in his hand and stared at the swaying flowers and grass in front of the big rock. He solemnly shouted, "Who's there?" Behind the flowers and grass, there was a flash, like a snake coiled on the tree trunk pretending to be a branch, or a crocodile floating in the water pretending to be rotten wood. When it didn't move, it was impossible to detect it. A beautiful woman wearing a coat of flowers and grass stood up from the wild flowers and grass. After a while, Yang Fan left the big rock and hurriedly walked toward the Khitan people's temporary village. There were several layers of defense around the village, so there was no one in the village to keep an eye on Yang Fan. Because of Fei Mo's friendliness toward him, the Khitan people in the village treated him as one of their own. In this village, he was completely free. Fei Mo. From afar, Yang Fan saw many people walking out of a huge hut. With a quick glance, he saw that they were all leaders of various sizes. Fei Mo was also among them, talking and laughing with the others. Hearing Yang Fan shout, Fei Mo said a few words to the others and then walked over with a smile. Fei Mo walked in front of Yang Fan, sizing him up from head to toe. Suddenly, she burst into laughter, looking extremely pleased with herself. Yang Fan originally wanted to say something to him, but seeing his strange expression, he couldn't help but be stunned and asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Fei Mo said with a smile, "I don't need to send someone to escort you out of the mountains. In 2 days, we'll leave together. Once we're out of the mountains, I'll let you go." Yang Fan was stunned. "You're going out of the mountains? Why are you going out of the mountains? To attack cities and plunder land again?" Fei Mo said proudly, "Wrong. It's not just me who's going out of the mountains. Our entire tribe is going out of the mountains to build the kind of foundation you mentioned." Yang Fan frowned and faintly had an ominous feeling. What happened? Could it be that the imperial court has suffered another defeat? Fei Mo laughed loudly and put his hands on his hips. "That's right. Our Grand Marshal has won another great battle. The 180,000 soldiers that the imperial court dispatched were utterly defeated by our Grand Marshal. Even your current Prime Minister and Minister of War, Wang Xiaojia, lost his life in this battle." Yang Fan's expression changed abruptly, and he cried out involuntarily, "How is this possible? How can this be? What's impossible about this?" Fei Emo saw Yang Fan's shock and became even more proud. She told Yang Fan the news that Sun Wanrong had just sent back. It turned out that Wang Xiaojie had led the 180,000 Zhou soldiers into Hebei. When Sun Wanrong received the news, he knew that the Zhou army had the advantage in numbers and that it would be difficult to use their arrogance, like in the first battle, to lure them into a trap. Therefore, he immediately pulled back his forces and fought as he retreated, luring the Zhou army to pursue them northward. When they retreated to the vicinity of Yellow Deer Valley, they could only retreat back into the mountains and use the layers of mountains as a barrier. However, Sun Wanrong was not willing to retreat just like that. It was impossible to hide the news of Li Jinzhong's death after returning to the mountains this time. Moreover, his current prestige was not enough to obtain the support of all his clansmen. Therefore, he was determined to fight another battle. Therefore, he once again led the army to attack Lulong and deliberately delayed the battle, allowing the Zhou army's request for reinforcements to smoothly reach Wang Xiaojie's main camp. At the same time, he sent a letter to King Shi, asking King Shi to feign an attack on the cities of the Zhou dynasty to attract Wu Yui's forces, so that he would not dare to send troops to cooperate with Wang Xiaojie in battle. After Wang Xiaojie received the urgent letter from Lulong, he immediately traveled day and night to Lulong to help. At this time, he encountered the same problem as Chao Renshi, whether to pass through Yellow Deer Valley or not. Chao Renshi was ambushed and defeated here, and his 160,000 troops were completely annihilated. How could Wang Xiaojie be willing to repeat his mistakes? Moreover, he had sent out scouts in advance and found out that there were indeed chitin activities in this area. However, if he didn't go through Yellow Deer Valley, he could only go around the mountains. In this way, it would take him at least 10 days to reach Lulong. After asking the local guide, Wang Xiaojie learned that this Yellow Deer Valley was also called the West Gorge Stone Valley. At the other end of the mountains, there was another valley called the East Gorge Stone Valley. The path of the East Gorge Stone Valley was shorter than the West Gorge Stone Valley. Moreover, the mountain terrain was more dangerous because one side was a cliff and the other side was a cliff that pierced the clouds. Therefore, although it was not easy to pass through, it was also not easy for others to ambush. That was because it was impossible to climb up the mountain. Even if someone could climb up, the precipitous mountain walls were bare. It was impossible to carry rolling logs and stones up, and only a few people could stand on top of it. This completely ruled out the possibility of the chitins laying an ambush on the mountain. In view of this, Wang Xiaojie decided to transport his troops through the East Gorge Stone Valley. There were several mountain roads in this valley that were very narrow, even grain carts would not be able to pass through. However, Wang Xiaojie's purpose was to solve the siege of Lulong. At worst, he could abandon the grain carts. As long as the army passed through the valley and solved the siege of Lulong, they would naturally be able to replenish their rations. Therefore, Wang Xiaojie commanded the army to pretend to go to the Yellow Deer Valley. Halfway through, he suddenly made a turn and rushed to the East Gorge Stone Valley. Unexpectedly, the East Gorge Stone Valley was already guarded by chitin soldiers. As soon as the two sides fought, Wang Xiaojie knew that they had encountered the main force of the chitin people. It turned out that before Wang Xiaojie used the diversion strategy, Sun Wanrong had also repaired the road openly. He knew that the Yellow Deer Valley had become a sore point for the Zhou army. As long as he set up a diversion, it was enough to scare the Zhou army. If he did not go through the Yellow Deer Valley, the most likely choice for the Zhou army was the East Gorge Stone Valley. He had already withdrawn his main force from Lulong and stationed his troops here. This time he could not use the terrain to ambush in the valley, nor could he let the Zhou army use such a simple trick to lure the enemy. Therefore, he gathered his main force and crossed the mountain pass of the East Gorge Stone Valley to fight the Zhou army. As soon as the two sides fought, Wang Xiaojie knew that this was the main force of the enemy and thus understood the enemy's strategy. Therefore, he personally led the elite troops as the vanguard, hoping to wipe out the enemy's main force here to prevent them from escaping. At that time, the battle would inevitably be protracted, which was what the Empress was most worried about. In the battle, Sun Wanrong ordered the Khitan soldiers to feign defeat and lure the enemy deeper. Wang Xiaojie was eager to win and did not notice it. He ordered his troops to follow up and bite them tightly, not allowing them to leave the battle. The two sides fought and advanced until they reached the other end of the East Gorge Stone Valley. At that moment, the 180,000 troops of the Zhou army formed a long dragon. The dragon's head had already reached the other end of the valley, and the dragon's body stretched for more than 5 kilometers. Half of the dragon was outside the other end of the valley. Although the Zhou army had the advantage in terms of military strength, because of the narrow valley path, the number of people who could fight the enemy was limited. Seeing that the Zhou army was about to attack the valley entrance, Sun Wanrong suddenly ordered a counterattack and charged back without any regard for their lives. Wang Xiaojie was not to be outdone. He led his army forward. The terrain of the valley was not suitable for arranging troops. In terms of disadvantageous conditions, it was disadvantageous to both sides, so Wang Xiaojie was not afraid. However, he did not know that while he was fighting, his backyard was on fire. It turned out that Sun Wanrong had considered that although the Zhou army had 180,000 troops, once they entered the valley, they would not be able to use their many troops. The advantage of the Zhou army would not be able to be displayed, so he did not need to arrange 60,000 troops here. Therefore, he only arranged 40,000 troops at the entrance of the valley. The other 20,000 troops were lying in ambush in the Yellow Deer Valley. If the Zhou army really dared to pass through the Yellow Deer Valley, these 20,000 troops could rely on the favorable terrain to hold their ground. The 40,000 troops he had placed in the East Gorge Stone Valley could also arrive in time to help and cut the Zhou army in half. It was the same the other way around. If the Zhou army chose the East Gorge as a breakthrough point, then the 20,000 Khitan troops lying in ambush in the Yellow Deer Valley could also arrive in time to help when the battle was in full swing. In terms of this arrangement, Sun Wanrong's move was indeed more outstanding than Wang Xiaojie, the famous general of Wuzhou. Deputy Marshal Su Honghu was commanding the army to enter the valley when the 20,000 Khitan cavalry suddenly charged out from the flank. As they charged, they shouted, "The Tangs have fallen into the trap! Annihilate the Tang army!" Su Honghu turned pale with fright. He thought that he had really fallen into the Khitan ambush, especially when the 20,000 Khitan cavalry were charging here. At a glance, they covered the sky and covered the earth. He did not know how many troops there were. Su Honghu was afraid that he would follow in Chao Rincher's footsteps. He actually led half of the Zhou army that had not entered the valley and fled. The Khitan reinforcements scared Su Honghu away and immediately attacked the back of the Zhou army. At the same time, they continued to make noise, shouting that the Tangs had fallen into an ambush. The Tang army in the valley did not know what was going on. They only knew that the Khitan were attacking from both the front and the back. Immediately, the morale of the army was thrown into chaos. Poor Wang Xiaojie, a famous general in the chaos, was squeezed by his own troops and fell off the cliff with his horse. With Wang Xiaojie's death, the Zhou army had even less desire to continue fighting. They were in such a mess that they could not form a battle force. The Khitan attacked from both sides and slaughtered them. Sun Wanrong then led the army to chase after Su Honghu. Su Honghu was so frightened that he ran for his life. He was utterly defeated and had no way to launch a counterattack. In this battle, the Tang army's third army to subdue the rebels finally failed. The Khitan's morale was high. Hearing the news, King Shi's confidence also increased. He had only been feigning an attack, but now it became a real attack on the Zhou cities. When Wu Yi heard that Wang Xiaojie's 180,000 strong army had been halved in one battle and the remaining half had fled, he was so shocked that he did not dare to leave the city. He could only rely on the city to defend against the Shi's attack. In the entire Hebei region, there was no longer a Zhou army that could threaten them. Under these circumstances, Sun Wanrong finally decided to start building his own base. The news of the Supreme Khan Li Jinzhong's death could also be announced at this time. The joy of victory had indeed diluted the impact of Li Jinzhong's death. His authority was also established because of this battle. When Yang Fan heard this, his heart was filled with sorrow. When did my Tang dynasty become so weak? There's no need to talk about Taizong Li Shimin, but Gaozong Li Ji's martial arts are also outstanding. This man, known for being afraid of his wife, has never shown weakness in the face of foreign enemies. He was the one who brought the Song Mountains into the territory of the Tang dynasty. He was the one who extended the borders of the Tang dynasty to the waters of Wuhu. He was the one who destroyed Tiela, the Western Turks, beached Goguryeo, defeated the Wei kingdom at the Battle of Baimen River, pacified Fujian and Guangdong. Jiaoji, it's only been a few years. How could the military strength of the dynasty have weakened to this extent? At the hands of a puny chiton, we've lost again and lost so miserably? In contrast to Yang Fan's desolation, Fei Mo was in high spirits. That's right, why did you call me? Only now did Yang Fan remember that he still had an important matter to attend to. For the moment, he had no time to be sentimental about the dynasty. He hurriedly said, I feel that my body is a little hot. I'm afraid it's not right. Get me some medicine. Fei Mo could be considered half a native doctor and knew some medical skills. The medicinal herbs that they had gathered were all kept by her. Fei Mo curiously asked, Are you feeling a little hot? She raised her hand to touch his forehead. Yang Fan blocked her hand and impatiently said, You think I can't feel it? Hurry up and get the medicine. Don't tell me you can't bear to part with me. Fei Mo chuckled and said, I know you're in a bad mood. I won't argue with you. Then she hummed an unknown song and went to get the medicine for him. Chapter 736. Fei Mo scratched her head and inspected the herbs in the crude warehouse. I don't have a lot of herbs. Anna Marina, reed root, Rehmannia, forsythia, yellow lotus, just these. Fei Mo picked up a few herbs and said to Yang Fan, I'll boil some for you. Eat it and see the effect. In fact, Fei Mo only knew medicinal properties and which herbs could cure which diseases. She didn't know how to feel a person's pulse, nor could she make a prescription. She was purely a Mongolian doctor. Yang Fan said, Look at your rough hands and feet. I'll make it myself. He snatched the medicine bag and also took away the medicine jar that was placed by the door. He didn't expect that Anu and Gu Zhuting would actually find him and find this place. But he who was overjoyed immediately heard a piece of shocking news. Anu was sick. Anu and Gu Zhuting had been following closely behind the chitons. After entering the mountain, a large group of people passed by in front of them, and it was easy for the two of them to keep up with them. After wandering for about a day, both of them lost their way back, but they didn't care. They just followed the large group of people forward. When the chitons returned to their nest in the mountains and set up camp, they began to look for Yang Fan's whereabouts. Along the way, they didn't bring much food, although they could easily catch some small animals in the forest with their skills. They didn't dare to light a fire while chasing the chitons, so they could only find some wild fruits to fill their stomachs. When the chitons returned to their camp, the two secretly stole something from them to fill their stomachs. The chitons' tents were all over the mountain, and the sentries on the periphery were mainly to prevent a sneak attack from a large group of soldiers. Although the possibility was very small, they had to guard against it. Because the defense line was not tight, it was easy for them to sneak in with their skills. But it was difficult for them to find Yang Fan among so many scattered thatched huts. The two temporarily hid in a cave in the shade of the mountain outside the chitons' camp. They rested at night and sneaked into the chitons' camp to look for Yang Fan during the day. After searching for 3 days, Gu Zhuting finally found Yang Fan today. According to their original plan, after finding Yang Fan, the three of them would leave this place. Although the mountains were high and the forests were dense, there would be a time when they could get out. With the three of them supporting each other, the chances of them escaping would increase greatly. But since the night before yesterday, Anu had been feeling unwell. Her body kept on having a low fever, and by yesterday morning it had developed into a high fever, as if she was suffering from malaria. Sometimes she would even talk nonsense and become delirious, which frightened Gu Zhuting. In the evening, Anu's high fever gradually subsided and she woke up a little. Hearing that Gu Zhuting didn't go to Yang Fan for a whole day to take care of her, Anu couldn't help but be anxious. Under the repeated urging, Gu Zhuting had to abandon her today and continue to look for Yang Fan. But this morning, Anu's temperature rose again, but it wasn't as serious as yesterday. In this era, having a headache and fever was not a minor illness that could be ignored casually. A little carelessness could turn into a life-threatening problem. After hearing that, Yang Fan immediately thought of Fei Mo, the Mongolian doctor, and had to go to him in a hurry to get the medicine. Although Fei Mo had promised to let him go and behaved like a man, Yang Fan's current situation was different, and he had to be vigilant. Both Anu and Gu Zhuting were beauties. If the other party really had any evil ideas, it would be like sending sheep into the tiger's mouth. So he didn't dare to reveal the existence of Anu and Gu Zhuting. The cave where Anu was hiding was on the side of the mountain outside the chitin camp. This side was close to a jungle on a steep slope. The jungle was so dense that probably only snakes could get through. Therefore, the security on this side was lax. It was impossible to hunt here, and there was nothing to pick. Therefore, ordinary chitin people rarely appeared here. Yang Fan was skilled in martial arts, and with the guidance of Gu Zhuting, a master of concealment, the two easily passed through the chitin sentries on the periphery, quietly turned to the side of the mountain, and entered the cave. The cave was damp and cold, and the cave on the side of the mountain was even colder. As soon as they entered, there was a bone-chilling cold. There was a fire in the cave. The flame was already very weak. Above the fire, there was an ember that was still in the shape of a thick tree trunk. It was faintly glowing with a hint of red. There was a pile of fur next to the fire. It was a wolf-skin mattress and a few sheepskin jackets that Gu Zhuting stole from the chitin people. When Yang Fan saw a pile of messy hair on the sheepskin jacket, he hurriedly handed the herbs and medicine jar to Gu Zhuting and quickly rushed over. Anu. Yang Fan called softly and gently lifted the sheepskin jacket. Anu was curled up under the sheepskin jacket. Her face, which had returned to its original appearance, looked very pale. Her lips were chapped, and her pale lips had lost their color, but her cheeks were flushed. Before his hand touched her cheeks, he could already feel a burning sensation. She was probably unconscious from the fever, and had no idea that Yang Fan had come to her side. Gu Zhuting sighed softly and placed the medicine jar under the stone wall on the side of the cave. Strings of cold water droplets continuously fell into the medicine jar. She went outside the cave to cut down 2 small trees and came back. She chopped the small trees with her sword and put them on top of the fire. The fire burned fiercely, and the branches crackled as they burned. Looking at Anu's haggard appearance, Yang Fan held her head in his arms, and tears welled up in his eyes. Anu slowly woke up and murmured like a moan, "Master Gu, you're back. Did you find him?" Yang Fan said repeatedly, I found him. Anu, I'm right here." As he spoke, his tears finally flowed down, and big drops fell on the corner of Anu's chapped lips. Anu's consciousness was obviously much slower than usual. She was drowsy and half-conscious. When she heard Yang Fan's words, she weakly opened her eyes and stared at Yang Fan for a long time. Her eyes suddenly showed a touch of surprise, and she tightly grabbed onto Yang Fan's clothes and shouted, "Lang Jun! Lang Jun?" Yang Fan looked at her red and swollen eyes and nodded hard. It's me. I'm right beside you. Lang Jun." Anu tightly threw herself into Yang Fan's arms, and choked with tears gushed out like a spring. "Lang Jun is safe and sound, eh? I'm so happy." During the days when Yang Fan was missing, she was the one who suffered the most. Whether it was physically or mentally, she was constantly being tortured. Doing good deeds and refining corpses was indeed the fastest way for her to get news of Yang Fan, but it also meant that she was trapped in fear and sorrow all the time. Her energy and physical strength had long been overdrawn, and she relied entirely on her mental strength to support herself. When she finally found the whereabouts of Yang Fan and saw that Yang Fan was still alive, her mental strength relaxed, and her body and spirit that should have collapsed long ago could no longer hold on. Her current physical condition was completely a reaction of her anxious and nervous mind and exhausted body to repair itself. At this moment, she was in Yang Fan's arms, and she cried to her heart's content. Her tears wetted Yang Fan's chest, and as the tears gushed out, her spirit and complexion miraculously improved. All of this made Gu Zhuting, who did not know what was going on, secretly amazed. In her opinion, Anu's current state of weakness would not improve without at least 10 days to half a month's rest. But when Yang Fan came, she actually improved so quickly. Her eyes were obviously filled with spirit, and the gray complexion on her face was also glowing. Her body that was so weak that she could not even speak a word could actually sit up. A miracle! It was simply a miracle. Is the sovereign the reincarnation of a ginseng baby? Gu Zhuting stared at the side with her eyes wide open. She only felt that Yang Fan was 10,000 times more magical than the smelly herbs that were being boiled in the urn. If the sovereign was stuffed into the urn and boiled, would he be able to cure all kinds of diseases? Lang Jun, let's leave quickly. If they find out that you have gone missing, they will definitely search everywhere. Anu said a lot to Yang Fan while crying and laughing. Her words were messy. The first sentence was still talking about this, and the next sentence was talking about something else. After such a long period of longing and pain, she had too many things to say, but as her thoughts gradually became clear, she finally thought of an important problem. We have to leave immediately. Yang Fan shook his head lightly and said, How can you leave in your current condition? You should focus on recuperating first. Don't worry. I have saved the life of one of their leaders, so they no longer see me as an enemy. They originally planned to let me go when they left this place. Yang Fan sighed, hugged Anu's body and said softly, The imperial court has suffered another defeat. The Khitans plan to fight their way back to their hometown to establish their base. Since Taizong and Gaozong, when has the imperial court suffered such a big loss? Now the imperial court is like the Buddha in heaven. It looks magnificent on the outside, but empty on the inside. Anu said blankly, Then what should we do now? Yang Fan sighed. I am not a god. What can I do? He lovingly stroked Anu's hair, kissed her forehead lightly, and said softly, I will go home with you. At this time, Wu Yanxiu, the future son-in-law of the Wu Zhou dynasty, had already brought a large number of wedding gifts from the south to the black sand of the Turkic Khaganate. But the news of the imperial court's third army being defeated again, and the death of the prime minister and minister of war Wang Sere had also reached the Turkic Khaganate from the east. Moshe did not expect that the once insufferably arrogant Tang dynasty had actually declined to such a state and was defeated again and again in the hands of a small Khitan. Moshe's greed suddenly increased, and the peace negotiations that he was originally very satisfied with now seemed far from enough to him. Therefore, Moshe immediately turned hostile and declared that his daughter should be married to the Li royal family, not the Wu family. The Turkic Khaganate did not recognize the Wu Zhou regime, so he detained Wu Yanxiu, imitated the Khitans, and raised the slogan of Follow the Tang to conquer the Zhou and send out 100,000 cavalry. Because of the Khitans' rebellion, the border of the eastern part of Hebei, which was originally a barrier, was empty, and the Turkic Khaganate killed their way in from here. The Turkic Khaganate's military force was far superior to the Khitans, and they already knew how to use various siege weapons. Under their attack, the armies of Jingnan, Pingdi, and Qingyi were immediately defeated, and Guizhou, Tanzhou, Dingzhou, and Zhaozhou fell one after another. Following the Khitans and the Shi tribe, the Turkic Khaganate also killed their way into this land and wantonly looted. Chapter 737. Yu Fu, bring another jar of wine over. Qi Ding gave an order, and a burly man swaggered out of the shack and rushed to a large thatched hut not far away. It was already very late, and the entire mountain camp had fallen into a deep sleep. Only the hut where the Khitan generals held their daily meetings was still ablaze. A bonfire was burning in the center of the hut, and a large pot was placed over it. Water was boiling in the pot, and the rich aroma of meat spread far and wide. There were more than 10 large huts built around the meeting hut. Some were used to store grain. Some were used to store clothes, bedding, and other supplies. There was also a hut that was specially used to store captured wine. The huts were not locked, and there was no need to lock them. Furthermore, there was no one watching over them. The entire camp was sealed off, and no one would dare to steal anything from them. Yu Fu's head was heavy, and his feet were light. He opened the door of the hut and walked in the dark. As soon as he entered, he saw a few rows of wine jars piled high. He didn't need to light a lamp to know where they were. Yu Fu, who was in a drunken stupor, casually touched a jar of wine. He excitedly picked it up, turned around, and walked out. Yang Fan stood in the dark, and he was secretly shocked and broke out in a cold sweat. Yu Fu had almost touched him just now, so Yang Fan was quick-witted. He grabbed a jar of wine and handed it over. Fortunately, Yu Fu had just come in through the light, and his eyes were dark. In addition, he drank a little too much, so he thought that he had touched a jar from a pile of wine jars. Yu Fu walked out of the hut, and with a hook of his foot he closed the door and ran back into the hut while humming a folk song. Yang Fan secretly sighed. When the sound of his footsteps faded away, he also quietly came out of the hut. He came tonight to search for tonics in the hut next door. Although he didn't know most of the herbs, he had practiced martial arts since he was a child, and in order to strengthen his muscles and bones, his master had given him many tonics to strengthen his body. He knew all of these herbs. Half of Anu's illness was depression in her heart, and the other half was her body's haggardness. After knowing that Yang Fan was safe and sound, her heart had been cured without medicine, but the weakness of the body could not be cured by mental strength. Yang Fan saw that she was weak, had no appetite for meat, and couldn't replenish her strength with porridge, so he wanted to get some tonics for her. With the tonics in hand, Yang Fan thought of using wine to help the medicine spread, so he went into the wine hut and quietly drank a water pouch. Now that he had the things in hand, he was about to leave. Glancing at the hut that was ablaze with flames, he suddenly had a strange feeling. Are these Khitans just having a normal drinking party tonight? Yang Fan had lived here for a long time, and he had never seen them stay up late at night. If it was a celebration, they had already announced the news this afternoon, and the whole camp had celebrated. Could it be that they were still in high spirits? A hint of doubt rose in Yang Fan's heart, and he subconsciously rushed to the hut. In the hut, Qi Ding was sitting at the head, with Fei Mo and several generals on his left and right respectively. In front of each of them was a plate of hand-grabbed mutton, wild vegetables, dried fruits, and glutinous rice cake. Fei Mo was holding a piece of fat and juicy mutton and was chewing it with her mouth open. She chewed until her cheeks were greasy and her hands were full of grease. Yu Fu returned to the hut, broke the mud seal, and removed the cover. He poured a large bowl of wine in front of each chief, leaving only a little wine base. He happily returned to his table, and seeing that there was no more meat on the table, he took the basin to the pot of boiling water and scooped a few more pieces. The mutton was not completely cooked, and when he took a bite it was bloody, but he ate it with relish. Qi Ding sat at the head, waiting for an excited general to finish singing. He raised the bowl of wine and took a big gulp, then said loudly, "Everyone quiet down!" The hut was in a mess, and only quieted down after a while. Qi Ding said, "Heaven bless the Khitans. Although the Supreme Khan has returned to the Temple of the Gods, we still have the Great Marshal, and we are still invincible. With this defeat, the Tang army no longer has enough power to fight against us. The generals immediately clamored. Qi Ding pressed his hands together and said in a deep voice, "The great marshal has sent back an order, ordering us to move our entire tribe from the deep mountains to the Eagle's Mouth, 400 miles northwest of Yingzhou, and build our city there. Everyone, drink to your heart's content today, and start preparing tomorrow. We will depart the day after tomorrow." Qi Ding took another gulp of wine and said, "The great marshal has not returned yet, and he plans to fight a few more battles. Since we are going to build a city, the wealth we have now is far from enough, and we need to plunder more things." Yu Fu shouted, "Brother Qi, I thought that the Tang dynasty was very powerful, but I didn't expect them to be so weak. They are really a bunch of useless chickens and dogs. If they are so useless, why should we be afraid of them? Why go to the Eagle's Mouth to build a city? It is a waste of time and energy. Why don't we conquer a big city and occupy it?" As soon as Yu Fu said this, several chiefs immediately responded. Qi Ding glared at them and said, "Do not underestimate the enemy. If Chao Rinshir's army did not underestimate the enemy, how could they be so easily killed by us? Do you know how big the Tang dynasty is? The Tang dynasty still has soldiers and horses, but they are scattered all over the country and can't be drawn out. Based on our current strength, although we have hurt them, we are still far from being able to fight them head-on. Even if the imperial court has lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers, as long as they want to fight, they can still send out troops. But even if we only lose 30 to 50,000 soldiers, will there still be people left?" Yu Fu coldly stared at these hot-headed generals and said, "We have stolen a city's worth of rations, and it is almost enough for our entire clan to eat for a whole winter. But to the Tang dynasty, how big of a loss is this? If our rations are destroyed, our entire clan will have to suffer from hunger and cold, and it will be easy for the imperial court to mobilize enough rations to supply hundreds of thousands of soldiers. In terms of family wealth, they are much richer than us. Even if they are prodigal sons, the family wealth earned by their ancestors is enough for them to squander for a while. But our foundation is too weak. We can't even take a crushing defeat. How can we be careless?" The generals were silent. Only now did they remember how big the Tang dynasty's family wealth was. Although they had won a few battles, they had only just gained the courage and determination to build their own foundation. They had not even built the city yet. To say that they could completely defeat the Tang dynasty was still a long way off in the indefinite future. They couldn't help but fall silent. Although Qi Ding didn't want them to be too arrogant, he also didn't want to hurt their morale. Seeing that they were silent, he laughed and encouraged them. Was the great Qin powerful in the past? Was the great Han powerful in the past? Was the great Sui powerful in the past? No matter how strong an empire, no matter how big the mountains and rivers, they're like grass and trees. There will be a day when they die. The Tang dynasty is no exception. Today we are weaker than them, but we can grow stronger step by step, while they are declining step by step under that old woman's torment. Heaven is fair. Everyone gives you a chance. It's up to you whether you can grasp it or not. We are a bit weaker now, but we have helpers. When there are too many wolves, even the tiger will have to flee." Fei Mo glared and said, "Great Chieftain Qi, are you talking about the Shi people? The Shi Emperor is cunning. In every battle, he will wait to see if we win or lose before making a move. Moreover, the Shi people's military strength is really weak. They can only fight on a small scale to restrain Wu Yui. Until now, they still haven't sent troops to Hebei to join us in battle. Are we going to rely on them?" Qi Ding smiled smugly and shook his head, saying, "No, no, no. The Shi people are useless, but what about the Turks?" He slyly swept his eyes over the crowd and revealed, "The Grand Marshal has already decided to ally with the Turks to deal with the Tang dynasty." The generals were moved. Their pasture land was adjacent to the Turks, and they had often been bullied by the Turks. The reason they had never had any major conflicts with the Turks was mainly because they were also nomads and their standard of living was worse than the Turks. The Turks had no interest in attacking them because there was nothing to fight over. However, the two tribes would occasionally fight over pastures and water sources. The results of each fight made them very clear that the Turks were much stronger than them. Although the two tribes did not have a good relationship, now that they were facing the enemy of the Tang dynasty together, they were the most desired allies. Hearing this, the generals were overjoyed and asked, "Is this true?" Qi Ding said confidently, "Of course. The Grand Marshal has sent a letter, instructing me to lead the entire tribe back to Ying province to build a city. The messenger is the Grand Marshal's trusted aide. He said that the Grand Marshal is preparing to send someone to the Turks to request an alliance with Mok Kagan. As long as the Turks are willing to ally with us, ha ha ha. Cheers! Cheers!" The generals' courage multiplied, and they all raised their wine bowls. Hiding in the shadows, Yang Fan was secretly shocked. The imperial court is weak and is already having such a hard time dealing with a small Khitan. If the Khitans and Turks were to ally, the Turks would still have connections with Tubo, and the Shi people would be emboldened. When that time comes, luckily, I have already quelled the chaos in the south. Otherwise, the entire empire and the surrounding regions would rise up together. But even if the south is not in chaos, if the Tubo, Turks, Khitans, and Shi people were to ally, it would still be an unimaginable disaster. Filled with worry, Yang Fan retreated. Luckily, this was the Khitans' lair deep in the mountains, and there was no need to worry about spies. Yang Fan, the only surviving captive, had already been completely ignored by them. There was no one guarding the surroundings. Otherwise, with Yang Fan's current state of mind and agility, it would be hard to guarantee that he would not be discovered. He hated Wu Zetian for killing her children and grandchildren for the sake of personal power. She slaughtered the loyal generals and generals who had gathered together in the past. He hated the Wu clan for monopolizing power. They had placed so many Wu clansmen who had never led a soldier before into the army and controlled the military. After so many years, the morale of the army and the training of their equipment had all been neglected. If not for this, how could Chao Runsher become the main general, while Li Duozhua, an experienced general, could only be in charge of the logistics in the rear camp? If not for this, how could Wang Xiaojie fight bravely at the front and the vice-marshal escape, causing chaos in the army and even the general to be pushed off the cliff? If not for this, how could Wu Yui, who led hundreds of thousands of troops to suppress the bandits, not dare to fight the enemy, not even daring to coordinate with Wang Xiaojie and take the initiative to send troops, only hiding in the city? Yang Fan hated all of this and wanted to overthrow it. He never thought that the world and the millions of people were just a bargaining chip for Wu Meinyang to seize power. He was powerless to deal with the war between countries. Even if he could persuade the elders of the seven sects and use all the power of the succession hall, it was impossible to replace the role of the country. But he was a Tang. Once the Khitans and Turks joined forces, the Shi people and Tubo people would be more arrogant, and it was hard to guarantee that no one in the south would take the opportunity to launch an attack. The Tang dynasty was about to become a fat piece of meat for a pack of tigers and wolves to pounce on. How could he sit back and watch this alliance? Absolutely not. Chapter 738. The slightly damp firewood first crackled as it burned. Then it burned fiercely. The smoke quickly faded, and a strong medicinal smell floated out from the vats. This time, the medicinal smell was not unpleasant. If one carefully savored it, there was a faint fragrance. After all, it was a tonic. Anu snuggled in Yang Fan's arms and said softly, "Your servant's body is much better. Lang Jun doesn't have to take the risk to get these tonics." Yang Fan smiled but did not say anything. In his heart, he thought, "If I didn't think of getting these herbs, I'm afraid I wouldn't have known that the Khitans had this kind of plan. These barbarians, when it comes to scheming, are not inferior to the 100 officials of the imperial court. This news must be sent to the court as soon as possible." Anu leaned into Yang Fan's arms with satisfaction and said in a low voice, "During the days when Lang Jun was missing, your servant did not know the taste of food and did not sleep at night. Now your servant is at ease. It's just that Xiao Man is still worried about you at home. It's all your servant's fault. As soon as I saw Lang Jun, I chased after you without thinking. At that time, I should have left someone to send a message back." Yang Fan hugged her tighter, and after a long silence he said softly, "Xiao Man has Ninzu and Surong by her side. With them quarreling and worrying, Xiao Man still has a goal in her heart. She doesn't have so much time to think about me." He comforted himself. In fact, even he did not believe that his and Xiao Man's relationship was the deepest. It was not only love but also family. Xiao Man had 2 children to take care of, and she did not have to travel outside. Her body might not be as haggard as Anu, but when the news that he was in danger spread back, how could the damage to Xiao Man's heart be small? But it was an expedition of 160,000 troops. The small Khitan people had never been taken seriously by the court. At the beginning, when they sent out 160,000 troops, there were officials in the court who criticized them. They thought that the emperor was making a fuss over a minor issue, and that it was the emperor who insisted on sending so many troops. At that time, even Yang Fan had the same idea. He thought that 30 to 50,000 elite soldiers would be enough to defeat the Khitan motley crew. Who would have thought that the imperial court would be defeated? Moreover, it was defeated once, twice, thrice, and defeated so miserably. Thinking of this, Yang Fan also felt an indescribable resentment in his heart. After a long silence, he softly said, "Get well quickly, we will soon leave the mountain." The news that the Turks had successively defeated the Jingnan, Pingdi, and Qingyi border armies, captured Gui Prefecture, Danzhou, Dingzhou, and Zhaozhou had not only reached the imperial court, but also the western regions. When Di Renjia, who was in the middle of settling the refugees, fortifying the border, and repairing the damage caused by the Turks' invasion, heard the news, he seemed to be stricken with a severe illness, instantly aging. In the last few years of exile, he had aged a great deal, but his optimistic and positive attitude towards life had never changed. Even though he was well aware that the strength of the country had declined over the years, he had always felt that this decline was only relative to the power of Taizong and Gaozong. No matter what, the imperial court was still in existence that the surrounding countries could only look up to. But the successive defeats of 3 armies in Hebei had been like a blow to the head, thoroughly waking him up. It turned out that the dynasty had already declined to this extent. Once those enemies who had temporarily laid an ambush because of the strength of the Tang dynasty realized that this was a paper tiger, could their ambitions still be contained? The night was deep, but Di Renjia had no desire to sleep. After pacing outside for a long time, he returned to his tent and silently drank. After a few cups of wine, he began to feel tipsy. He was an old official who had lived through the reign of Taizong and Gaozong. He had personally watched as the Tang dynasty grew stronger step by step. Now he had gone from a youth to a man of his prime, and now he was in his twilight years. His hair and beard were as white as snow, and the Tang dynasty, was it also beginning to decline? Marshal D. Great General Lu Shirda requests an audience. Di Renjia's drunken eyes indifferently glanced at the guard and waved his hand, ordering, "Invite him in." Lu Shirda slowly walked in, dragging his crippled leg. He clasped his hands to Di Renjia and said, "Lu Shirda pays respects to Marshal." Di Renjia didn't even raise his head. He only poured some more hot water into the basin and then carefully placed the tin wine pot in the middle of the hot water. "Sit, let's drink a cup or 2 together." Lu Shirda had only come to find Di Renjia to discuss countermeasures after hearing the news that the Turks had marched out of Hebei. He knew that Di Renjia had always rejected him, but he didn't know that when Di Renjia was in dire straits, he had repeatedly recommended Di Renjia to the imperial court, and Wu Zetian had already shown Di Renjia. Thus, he was rather surprised by Di Renjia's attitude. Lu Shirda saw that Di Renjia was so focused on the wine pot that he didn't raise his head, so he could only walk up and sit down on the stool across from Di Ren. His body was extremely fat, and the moment his plump buttocks pressed against the stool, it immediately squealed as if it was about to fall apart. Di Rengia couldn't help but laugh. "You old fool! How can you still be so fat at such an old age? I've never seen you lose any weight." Di Rengia's words were somewhat intimate, and Lu Shirta's heart warmed. He also couldn't help but laugh. "This servant actually doesn't eat much. It's just that I was born with this kind of physique. There's really nothing I can do about it." Di Rengia raised the wine pot and poured him a cup. "Come, drink." Lu Shirta said, "Marshal, this servant has come today because," Di Rengia said, "I know why you have come." "Haha, this matter. What else is there to say? Come, drink, drink." Lu Shirta sighed. He had no choice but to raise his cup and toast Di Rengia before downing it in one gulp. Lu Shirta usually didn't drink, and with his temperament, it was even more impossible for him to drink like this. His current action was enough to show the depression in his heart. Di Rengia chuckled and immediately poured him another cup. The two of them drank one cup after another, and gradually they became tipsy. At this time, the wind outside began to blow faster, and sporadic snowflakes began to fall. Although they melted before they hit the ground, the dampness on their faces told them that it had already begun to snow. Winter was coming very soon. Moshe can be considered an ambitious and ruthless character. He knows when to bow and submit, and he can fight and escape. In the morning, he beheads you and becomes sworn brothers. In the afternoon, he can stab you in the back. One moment, he can strut around arrogantly, and the next moment he can kneel and beg for mercy while kowtowing like pounding garlic. I, old D, don't bow to anyone. But I don't dare to bow to someone like this. Di Rengia scolded him with a smile as he drank a mouthful of wine. Lu Shirta's eyes began to moisten as he held his wine cup. "Sai, don't talk about him. To forge iron, one must be strong. If we are strong enough, no matter how cunning or tyrannical he is, what can he do? Black Tooth Chang Ji, Quan Xiancheng, Chengwading, they died too early. If any of these famous generals were still alive, the situation in Hebei wouldn't be so rotten. The Empress Dowager really shouldn't have killed them. Perhaps Lu Shirta was drunk, but he actually referred to the Empress Dowager as the Empress Dowager. Di Rengia seemed to be even more drunk than him. He actually didn't hear it at all and continued. The Empress Dowager was originally not good at military affairs, especially when she was the regent as a woman. There were many obstacles in the court, causing the Empress Dowager to place too much importance on military power. She gave it all to the Wu clansmen. But which one of the Wu clansmen knows how to lead an army? Lu Shirta sneered and said, "It's fine if they're not good at military affairs, but are they good at national politics? Fighting for power and profit is equivalent to national politics. Being good at scheming, and scheming is the way to rule a country? It's better to use the strategy of restraining barbarians. This is a national policy that has been effective since Taizong's time. Why can't it be persisted? Why should it be changed according to one's own preferences? To deal with barbarians, you have to make them fear the power of the imperial court, but you can't oppress them too much. Not to mention foreign tribes. Even if they are from the same tribe, if you oppress them too much and don't treat them as one of your own, who would be willing to serve you and bow to you? But what has the imperial court been doing all these years? In the third year of Shuigong, the imperial court launched a punitive campaign against the Tubo 9 tribes, which had first attached themselves to and then rebelled. They ordered the Western Turkic tribes to send troops to help. The Turkic tribes provided their own troops, horses, and money. After 6 months on the battlefield, they finally defeated the rebels and raised the prestige of the nation. In the end, the military campaign was over. It was fine if the imperial court didn't reward them with money, but there wasn't even a word of praise. Instead, the Empress Dowager used the reason that they attacked a Uyghur tribe without permission as an excuse. She reprimanded them and forbade them from entering the imperial court. She ordered them to be dispatched to Liangzhou and returned to their tribes. Are their sons not raised by their parents? Do they not have wives and children? They shed their blood for the imperial court, and this is the result they got. Who wouldn't be angry at being burned after crossing the river? Who wouldn't be disappointed? In the future, when there is a military campaign, which of the tribes attached to the imperial court will be willing to help? Who will be willing to contribute? An honest person like Lu Shurta was even more difficult to control than Di Renjia when he was enraged. He angrily said, "Master Di is always in the capital, but this servant has been guarding the borders all my life. I know this better than you. This servant's words are all true. If the nation doesn't have the grace of its trusted aides, how can they be loyal?" Also, the imperial court took advantage of the internal strife of the eastern and western Turkic Khaganate and issued an edict to persuade them to surrender. In the end, the Chibe Turkic Khaganate surrendered more than 5,000 and Gon Khaganate surrendered more than 4,000. All of them were injured, starving and pale. Not even 1 or 2 out of 100 had sheep or horses. However, they brought the young and supported the old, and came from afar to surrender, but the imperial court didn't give them any aid. As a result, they were crying piteously for food. Dead bodies piled on their pillows and curses filled the air. This servant saw this with my own eyes. The imperial court either didn't summon them to surrender, or since they did, they didn't give them any aid and let them die on their own. Where would the prestige of the imperial court go? What's more, the tribes were originally poorer than the imperial court. The majestic imperial court often extorted them. Forge the Great, Zhou's 10,000 kingdoms praised Tianshu and forced the rulers of the 4 barbarians to contribute. 10,000 kingdoms praised Tianshu? Bah! On the day that Tianshu was forged, how many of the tribes secretly cursed? Now the imperial court is forging the 9 cauldrons, and I heard that Wu Sansi is plundering the barbarians for donations. If it wasn't for the incident in Hebei, he wouldn't have stopped. The barbarians aren't fools. If you treat them like this, they won't be of one mind. Let's talk about the Turkic disaster. Back then, the Turkic Khan, Ashina Funyan, had surrendered to the imperial court. Prime Minister Pei Xingjian had promised on behalf of the imperial court that as long as he surrendered and personally went to the imperial court to ask for forgiveness, the imperial court wouldn't kill him. In the end, Funyan was executed when he arrived at the imperial court. The great Prime Minister Pei was betrayed by his own imperial court. If Funyan hadn't died that day, how could the disaster have happened today? Di Renjia naturally knew what Lu Shurta was talking about. These were all major mistakes made in the administration of the nation, but what could he do? Every time Lu Shurta said something, Di Renjia would drink a cup, and soon he was drunk. Di Renjia, who was filled with resentment and anger, could no longer hold it in and vented. This time the imperial court sent 28 generals and 160,000 soldiers for the northern expedition. Everyone felt that it was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. Since the imperial court looks down on the Khitans, why did they send so many soldiers? Lu Shurta said, "Isn't it because most of the generals are from the Wu clan, and what they lack the most right now is military merits?" The imperial court also wanted to appease the ambassador with Wu Sansi, and their intentions couldn't be clearer. It's a pity that the army was defeated too quickly, and Wu Sansi didn't even have time to set off. Di Renjia smiled bitterly. All these years, the imperial court has neglected military equipment, and the military power is controlled by the Wu clan's many prefectural princes who don't know how to use troops. The soldiers aren't well trained, and their military power is far from what it used to be. With a group of generals who aren't good at fighting, how could they not be defeated? In the end, after a huge defeat, the Empress Dowager was still not satisfied and sent a second army, which was still led by the Wu clan's nephew. This army reached Hebei, but other than wasting money and rations, they didn't achieve anything. They had no choice but to send Wang Xiaojie and let Su Honghu, who's affiliated with the Wu clan, be the deputy marshal. In the end, the more Di Renjia spoke, the more pained he felt. He was skilled in politics and knew that Wu Zetian, didn't give up on using the Wu clan's power to lead the army in the face of repeated defeats. This was to share military merits after a great victory and establish the Wu clan's prestige. In other words, Wu Zetian was now inclined to make the Wu clan's nephew the heir to the throne. This was to prepare for the transition of the Wu clan's regime. Thus, the more the great Zhou army lost, the worse the blow to Wu Zetian, and the more beneficial it was for Li Tang's revival. However, this price was too tragic. Hundreds of thousands of descendants died on the battlefield to satisfy the empress' desire for power. Di Renjie was worried that the Khitans would let go of their old grudges and ally with the Khitans. If that happened, the imperial court wouldn't just have to suffer a few defeats and lose a lot of strength. It would also have to deal with the southwest Tubo, the northwest Turks, the North Khitans, and the Shi people forming an anti-Zhou alliance. Once this happened, with the current strength of the imperial court, how would they deal with it? The snow outside the tent grew heavier and heavier. Unknowingly, the ground was covered in snow. At a glance, it was a vast expanse of whiteness. In the snow, several fast horses galloped over from afar and entered Di Renjie's camp. The messenger jumped off the horse, still panting, and said, "There's a copy of the Ministry of War that requires Marshal Di's perusal." Di Renjie's bodyguard accompanied him through the heavy snow to the commander's tent. As they walked, he asked, "Brother, why are you in such a hurry? Is there some important military news?" The messenger replied, "I'm here to deliver the transfer order. The imperial court has appointed Great General Liu as the deputy chief and Great General Shatsa as the chief of the vanguard. They're going to send troops to Hebei to suppress the rebels. Marshal Di is now the commander of the Western Army. If we want to transfer troops from here, of course we have to report to Marshal Di first." The bodyguard was surprised and said, "They want to transfer these two great generals? They are old generals who are good at fighting. Is the war in the north so urgent that they actually want to transfer two great generals to the north? I wonder who the commander of this army is." A look of disdain flashed across the messenger's eyes. However, his tone was extremely respectful and said, "The commander is the Jun Wang of Hanoi, Great General of the Right Jin Wu Guards, Wu Yizong." In the tent, the two old officials vented their complaints more and more. The more they spoke, the more resentful they became. First, they scolded loudly, and finally, they could not help but cry sadly. One of them had guarded the borders for his country all his life, but the country was getting weaker and weaker. He did not know what the future would be like. The other worked hard to govern for the prosperity of the country, but in exchange he was exiled again and again. He did not know if his hard work would bear fruit one day. What made them even more afraid was that the country they had been loyal to for their whole life was rapidly weakening. They did not know if there would be a day when the country would rise from the dead. The two old men scolded and cried and were drunk into a pool of mud. They hugged each other and slept on the same bed, their voices like thunder. They hoped that they could sleep forever and never wake up again. Chapter 739. Winter in the north had 4 distinct seasons. Winter should be a time of desolation. Thus, even though the first snow of the winter had yet to arrive, the mountains were already covered in fallen leaves. Only a few short trees still had a few yellow leaves hanging on them, waiting for the north wind to blow and sweep them away. At that time, the world would be covered in silver, and white snow would be the only color in the world. Due to the yellow leaves, the entire mountain range in the distance had a dark yellow hue. It was clearly different from the withered mountains up close. Under the sunlight, the distant mountains gave off a sense of warmth. Even though the first snow of the winter had yet to arrive, the wind was already extremely cold. Tens of thousands of Khitans, old and young, pulled by carriages and horses, carried all their supplies out of the col and headed north for more than 10 li. Most of these troops were old, young, women, and children. If a group of Zhou light cavalry attacked, they could easily inflict heavy casualties. However, San Wanrong did not return to escort them. only ordering them to return to the Ingzhou region. The largest armed force in the Hebei region was now in the hands of Wu Yi. Wu Yi, on the other hand, had holed up in the city the moment he arrived in Hebei, not taking the initiative to send troops to fight. Sun Wanrong was certain that as long as his army was active outside, Wu Yi would not dare to take any risks, so he had boldly made these arrangements. At this time, the Kaitins were as arrogant as Chao Renshi and Zhang Xuanyu when they had first arrived in Hebei. Fei Emo led his tribesmen and deliberately dragged his feet at the back. When all the troops had left the call, Fei Emo reined in his horse and turned to look at Yang Fan. Because the weather was getting colder, Yang Fan had also put on a chitin leather robe. Just from his appearance, he looked no different from them. Fei Emo looked at Yang Fan and loudly said, "You and I will part here." Yang Fan did not sneak away. He believed in Fei Emo's promise, and Fei Emo had no reason to lie to him. Most importantly, in this situation, if he left without saying goodbye, the Kaitins might become suspicious. Once the Kaitins guessed that he knew of their plan to ally with the Turks, it would be hard to predict what the Kaitins would do. Now, Yang Fan only acknowledged the poverty of the Kaitins. He no longer dared to look down on their military strength and intelligence. "Brother Fei, take care." Yang Fan didn't say anything. He just cupped his hands towards Fei Emo. Even though they were enemies, she was a worthy opponent. Fei Emo said, "I'll let you go today, and I'll return the favor. You are a general of the great Zhou dynasty, and I am a Khitan. After this farewell, it is hard to guarantee that we will not meet again on the battlefield. If that day comes, I will not let you off." Yang Fan smiled faintly and said, "It's all in your hands. Saving you is the same as saving myself. I don't think you owe me anything. If we meet again on the battlefield in the future, and you fall into my hands, I'll let you go once and repay you for today's favor." Fei Emo raised his eyebrows and said proudly, "Do you think you can still win?" Yang Fan said, "When two people fight, the final victor is usually the one who can take a beating. It is the same for the two countries. We have indeed suffered several defeats and had a few pieces of flesh torn off by you. It hurts, but it is still too early to talk about defeat. We can endure this kind of consumption, but you can't even endure it once. If you lose once, you will never have the strength to turn the tables again. We can afford to lose. You can't afford to lose." Fei Emo laughed loudly and said, "Good, then let us wait and see. I still have to escort the Khan back to Ingzhou. We will meet again on the battlefield." Fei Emo laughed loudly and left with his whip. All the Khitan generals already knew about the death of Supreme Khan Li Jinzhong. Sun Wanrong needed to borrow the prestige of a great victory to offset the impact of this news. However, this news was not announced to the public because the Zhou army had suffered defeat after defeat and suffered countless casualties, while the Kaitins had suffered very few casualties. In terms of the casualties of the high-ranking generals, the Zhou army had lost many generals, with the highest rank reaching the prime minister. As for the Kaitins, not only were the casualties of their soldiers extremely low, they did not lose a single high-ranking general, except for the secret death of Li Jinzhong. Li Jinzhong was their Khan, their supreme leader. Once Li Jinzhong's death was announced, it would greatly increase the morale of the Zhou army, but to the Kaitins, it would break their invincible golden body. It was disadvantageous to the Kaitins, so they still kept this news a secret. Fei Emo laughed loudly as he chased after his clansmen. Yang Fan stood at the foot of the horse mountain and looked in the direction they had gone. He gently patted the horse's neck and turned the horse's head to the colonel. Anu and Gu Zhuting were walking out of the colonel. Yang Fan smiled and stretched out his hand. Anu meekly handed over her small hand. Yang Fan lifted her up and grabbed her slender waist, carrying her onto the horse. There was another horse next to Yang Fan. Gu Zhuting also leaped onto it. The horse was also carrying some miscellaneous items. It was a pack horse that Yang Fan had requested from Fei Mo on the grounds that he was unfamiliar with the route and needed some food and clothing. Anu and Gu Zhuting's mounts had long been abandoned outside the mountain when they entered the mountain. If they were to bring them along, they would expose Anu and Gu Zhuting's whereabouts if they neighed. Yang Fan asked Gu Zhuting, "Miss Gu, which city is the nearest from here?" Gu Zhuting replied, "If we go north, we will reach Lulong, but then we will have to go the same way as the Khitans. To the southeast is Thousand Gold Smelting City, and then Horse City, but Horse City is a bit further away." Yang Fan said, "All right, then let's go to Thousand Gold Smelting City and talk there." Thousand Gold Smelting City. On top of the city gate tower, Ma Chao walked out from the city gate tower. He cupped his hand over his eyes and looked into the distance. He said to a soldier beside him, "We haven't found any soldiers in the last 3 days. I don't think there will be any more. How many soldiers do we have now?" The soldier at the side answered, "There are more than 5,000 soldiers who have found their way to Thousand Gold Smelting City, and about 7,000 brothers who have returned from Ma City and Lulong." Ma Chao's expression turned gloomy. He sighed and lamented. 160,000 soldiers. Only so few are left, and most of them are injured. Sigh. He sighed and turned around, saying, "I don't think there will be any more soldiers. Let's go back and report to the Grand General." The soldier suddenly said, "Someone is coming, riding 2 horses." Ma Chao turned around and squinted his eyes to look at the sky. After a few glances, he said with slight disappointment, "They should be commoners." The soldier also looked at them with his hand on the awning and praised, "HM, they seem to be commoners, and there are 2 women. In this chaos, 2 women actually dare to walk around outside. The women of the northern lands are really bold." "Is it a woman?" Yes, it's a woman." "No, that's not right. There are 3 of them." Ma Chao narrowed his eyes and looked at them with some doubts in his heart. Recently, not to mention the commoners who visited their relatives and friends, even the merchants didn't dare to walk outside easily. These 2 women and a man actually dared to walk outside in such a manner. Were they really ordinary commoners? Ma Chao thought for a moment and ordered, "Tell the city to stop them and ask them who they are." When Ma Chao said this, his body suddenly froze. Not only did his voice stop abruptly, even his body stopped moving. The soldier asked curiously, "Brigade Commander, what's wrong with you?" Ma Chao suddenly let out a strange cry and jumped high into the air. He laughed wildly and said, "It's Brother Fan! Ha ha ha, it's Brother Fan! He's still alive." The soldier jumped in fright and said, "Brigade Commander, what are you talking about? Who's still alive?" Ma Chao ignored him and rushed over. He leaned on the wall and shouted, "Brother Fan, I'm here. I'm Ma Chao." He shouted twice, but seeing that Yang Fan wasn't paying attention, Ma Chao became anxious. He leaped onto the city wall, stretched out his hand, pulled a large flag and waved it in the wind. The large flag fluttered in the wind. Ma Chao laughed and shouted, tears of joy flowing down his thin, dark cheeks and hanging on his long, untrimmed, messy beard. "Brother Chao! Brother Fan!" The 2 brothers who had survived the calamity hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces. Anu stood beside them, smiling as she looked at the 2 brothers who were revealing their true feelings, gently wiping the corners of her eyes. In fact, neither Yang Fan nor Ma Chao knew that the other had participated in the northern expedition. Although Yang Fan was personally appointed by the Empress, his rank was too low, and the various armies didn't know of his existence. As for Ma Chao's expedition to the north, Yang Fan also didn't know about it. This was because the Empress had drawn troops from all kinds of arms and services, and the composition of the entire army was abnormally chaotic. Yang Fan didn't expect that Ma Chao would also go on an expedition to the north, so he naturally wouldn't deliberately inquire about his news. However, after Yang Fan disappeared, the imperial court ordered Yang Fan's name to be found on the list of missing generals and academies. Princess Taiping, Wu Sanxi, and various other forces had also searched for him, especially after the propaganda of those commoners who had been asking about Yang Fan in the surrounding cities. How could Ma Chiao, who had been taking in the rebels in the 1,000-gold smelting factory these days, not know that his brother had also participated in this battle? The two of them laughed and cried for a long time before their emotions gradually stabilized. Only then did Yang Fan remember two urgent matters. He asked, "I need to immediately report to my family that I'm safe. At the same time, there is an important piece of news that I need to report to the imperial court. Is there any way?" Ma Chiao said, "The fastest way to report to Luoyang is through a military relay station. Now that you've disappeared, I don't know how worried your sister-in-law will be. Let's go. Quickly follow me into the city. A military relay station has just been set up in the city, and there will be news coming and going every day. We'll go find a courier and promise him some benefits so that he can make this trip on the way." Yang Fan said, "Of course we have to send a message to my family, but I still have an important military matter to report to the imperial court. I heard that after our army was defeated, the imperial court sent troops, one after another. Is there a general station nearby?" Hearing this, Ma Chiao sneered and said, "Don't mention it. Our army was completely wiped out, and the imperial court sent Wu Yi. Wu Yi hid like a tortoise as soon as he arrived. Helpless, the imperial court sent Wang Xiaozhi. Great General Wang was ambushed, and the deputy marshal escaped, burying Great General Wang's life. Right now, there is only General Li in the vicinity." Yang Fan asked curiously, "General Li? Which General Li?" Ma Chiao said, "It's the great general of the right guard, Li Duozhua. He's in charge of escorting provisions for our army." He laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "A 160,000-strong army. Let's not say completely wiped out. At the very least, the supply camp led by General Li is safe." Chapter 740. Inside Li Duozhua's temporary commander-in-chief's tent in 1,000-gold smelting city, Li Duozhua looked at an official letter that had just been delivered by a soldier and slammed it heavily on the table. A trace of grief and anger uncontrollably surged between his brows. He really wanted to curse. If it wasn't for the identity of that person, he would have already started cursing. On the day of the Yellow Deer battle, he was responsible for escorting the rations. The Khitan cavalry first dealt with the vanguard of the Yellow Deer Valley and then launched a surprise attack, destroying the cavalry and infantry of the Zhou army. Soon after, they charged towards his supply camp. Li Duozhua saw that the enemy was too powerful. If he continued to persevere, not only would he not be able to protect the rations, but he would also be completely annihilated. He set the rations on fire and led his troops to break out of the encirclement. The Khitans were anxious to obtain the rations and did not split up their troops to chase after them. Therefore, his supply camp became the only group of troops in the First Army to survive. Li Duozhua's troops, other than the coachmen and workers who transported the rations, had 15,000 soldiers and horses guarding the rations. That night, more than 2,000 people died in battle. Most of them were killed while defending against the Khitans' surprise attack. The rest, about 13,000 people, escaped safely. As soon as Li Duozhua stabilized his footing, he began to gather the disorganized troops. So far, he had gathered nearly 12,000 scattered troops. Among these people, other than those who were seriously injured and could not continue fighting, the remaining troops, including his own troops guarding the rations, numbered about 20,000 people. The commander of the Second Army was Wu Yi. Wu Yi trembled with fear as he rushed to Hebei. He hurriedly chose a few big cities with thick walls and hid his troops in them, never to come out again. Soon after, the Third Army, Wang Xiaojia, suffered a crushing defeat. Only after the Third Army's deputy marshal, Su Honghu, escaped did he realize that he had been tricked by the Khitans. But by this time, the vanguard troops had been completely annihilated. Later, News came that even Wang Xiaojie had fallen off a cliff and died in the chaos. Su Honghu's heart sank when he heard this. He knew that cowering in the face of battle and retreating without permission was already a capital offense. He had also sent the Minister of War, the current Prime Minister, and the chief of the Third Army, Wang Xiaojie, to his grave. Once he returned to the imperial court, he would definitely be beheaded. Not only that, he would be cursed for all eternity, and his family would be made into official slaves. Su Honghu, who was both shocked and scared, flew into a rage out of humiliation. Like a madman, he commanded the remnants of his troops to look for chitons for a decisive battle. Although it was said to be a remnant force, he had taken more than 80,000 of the 180,000 soldiers with him. The number of soldiers in this force had far exceeded the chitons' military strength and was enough to fight them head-on. Right now, Su Honghu only hoped to defeat the chiton army. It would be best if he could completely annihilate the chitons and use this great achievement to atone for his crimes. Even if he was defeated, as long as he could die in battle, the imperial court would remember his loyalty and would have the opportunity to punish him for his crimes and not implicate his family. At this time, as the remnants of the Chao Runsher Corps of the First Army, Li Duozhua did not know what to do. His troops were too few, and half of them were transport troops with limited combat strength. If he continued to fight the chitons alone, it was very likely that this force would be buried. It would also be difficult to meet up with Su Honghu because he could not contact him at all. As a result, Li Duozhua continued to gather the remnants of the defeated army while writing a letter to Wu Yui, hoping to meet up with him. Unexpectedly, Wu Yui refused with the reason that the provisions were limited and could not support more soldiers. He wanted him to meet up with the remnants of the Third Army, Su Honghu. With one look, Li Duozhua understood Wu Yui's sinister intentions. Li Duozhua was from the Bayan. His father was a leader of the Bayan tribe. After the Tang Empire was established, his father submitted to the Tang dynasty. Li Duozhua had been brave and good at fighting since he was young and had made many military achievements for the Tang dynasty. Coupled with his father's care, he became the general of the Right Yulin Royal Guards at a very young age and had been in charge of the Imperial Army and the North Gate for more than 10 years. With such an important position, he was naturally coveted. Wu Qingxi and Wu Sanxi had tried to rope him in more than once, but Li Duozhua was unmoved. He had no intention of interfering in politics. He would be loyal to whoever was the emperor. Wu Zetian had seen through his attitude, so when the generals of the various armed forces were eliminated, he did not touch him. Wu Yi, Wu Sanxi, and Wu Qingxi were both distant and distant. He knew that with his prestige in the family, it was impossible for him to become the crown prince. However, he was already a prince and was in charge of the most important imperial army, the Yulin Royal Guards. There was no benefit for him to take the risk of getting involved in the battle between the two. Thus, he had always maintained a neutral position, waiting for the right price. Under such circumstances, he had always hoped to be able to grasp the entire Yulin Guard in his hands. This way, regardless of whether Wu Qingxi or Wu Sanxi won, if they wanted to sit firmly on the throne, they would have to rely heavily on him. In this way, Li Duozhua of the Right Yulin Guard would become a thorn in his side. Li Duozhua was brave and skilled in battle, and had always been popular in the army. Moreover, he was unwilling to accept any party's enticement, including Wu Yi. The Yulin Guard was divided into the left and right Yulin Guards. In this way, Li Duozhua was equivalent to taking away half of his military power, causing the bargaining chips in his hands to be greatly discounted. Thus, he had always viewed Li Duozhua as a thorn in his side. However, Wu Yi had always appeared to be loyal and devoted to Wu Zetian, obediently obeying her orders. He had never had the intention to establish his own force, so he could not slander and exclude Li Duozhua in front of Wu Zetian. With Wu Zetian's shrewdness, his thoughts might not necessarily be hidden from her. Moreover, the Empress trusted Li Duozhua very much, so his slander might not be effective. Thus, Wu Yi could only look on helplessly as Li Duozhua, this thorn in his side, could not be removed. Now the opportunity had come. Li Duozuo had less than 20,000 troops in his hands, and half of them were supply troops, so their battle prowess was limited. In Wu Yuyi's calculations, since the Khitans were so vicious, as long as Li Duozuo's 20,000 troops encountered the Khitans, they would be no different from delivering themselves to the Khitans. They would definitely not return. He had tactfully refused Li Duozuo's approach because he wanted to borrow the Khitan's knife to remove this thorn in his side. However, he had never thought that even if he was Wu Zetian's nephew, Wu Zetian would not be at ease to completely hand over the most important and core armed forces that protected the imperial palace and her safety to his hands. The emperor needed balance. Even if he brought down Li Duozuo, Wu Zetian would definitely arrange for someone who was unwilling to bow down to him to be the great general of the Right Yulin Guard. Li Duozuo did not think that the imperial court was in such a difficult situation. At such a critical moment, Wu Yuyi still wanted to get rid of dissidents. He was full of resentment. Just as he was thinking hard about what to do with his remaining army, a soldier came to report. "General, Commander Ma of the brigade wants to see you. Also with him is Commandant Yang Fan, who has just been found." "Yang Fan? Yang Fan is still alive? Quick, 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 call them in." Li Duozuo was so surprised that he forgot himself and stood up. His son-in-law, Yehuli, and Yang Fan were good friends. When the two of them were dating, Yang Fan had met this great general, Li Duozuo. After Li Duozuo learned about Yang Fan's performance in the western regions, he greatly appreciated his bravery and resourcefulness. Moreover, the old general, Lu Shirda, was very fond of Yang Fan. Lu Shirda and he were both of the neutral faction in the army. Due to Lu Shirda's influence, Li Duozuo had a favorable impression of Yang Fan. During the time when Yang Fan's life and death were unknown, the various forces related to him had inquired about him at the front lines through all kinds of connections. Li Duozuo was currently gathering the remaining troops, so all these inquiries were sent to him. Thus, as soon as the personal guard mentioned it, he immediately remembered Yang Fan's identity. Ma Chiao brought Yang Fan into the commander's tent and saluted Li Duozuo. Li Duozuo was full of smiles. He left the commander's desk and helped Yang Fan up. Looking him up and down, he saw that he was not missing an arm or a leg and was full of vigor. He was even more pleased. Good, good, good. This general is very relieved that Colonel Yang is safe and sound. Where has Commandant Yang been all this time? Without waiting for Yang Fan to answer, Li Duozuo said, Come, come, come. Sit down and talk. Ma Chiao, you sit as well. Thank you, General. Yang Fan bowed in thanks and sat down on a seat to the side. He recounted everything that had happened since he was captured, only skipping the part where he was assassinated in Julu City and Anu had traveled thousands of miles to search for her husband. The Chechen people want to form an alliance with the Turks? Li Duozuo was alarmed. Li Duozuo was not a martial artist who only had the courage of an ordinary man. After Yang Fan told him about the matter, he immediately realized the great danger contained in it. Li Duozuo immediately said, Commandant Yang, for you to be able to bring back such important news, you have done a great service to the nation and the people. This matter is too important. Let's talk about it in detail later. I need to immediately write a memorial and report it to the imperial court as fast as possible. Yang Fan stood up and said, This general understands. This general and brigade commander Ma will wait outside the tent. Li Duozuo said, There's no need. Have a seat. Li Duozuo ordered someone to bring ink, paper, and inkstone. The paper used to write the memorial had to be specially made and printed. It was not something that could be written on any random piece of paper. Even though the matter was urgent, he could not be careless when writing to the emperor. Li Duozuo first wrote a memorial on an ordinary piece of paper, hurriedly scanned it, made some changes, and handed it to Yang Fan, saying, Colonel Yang, please take a look and see if there are any omissions. There were a few smears on the letter, but the wording was inappropriate. As for the matter described, It was naturally clear and did not miss anything. Yang Fan also knew that Li Duozhua wanted him to read it, first to let him know that Li Duozhua did not want to covet his credit. The source of the information and how to obtain it were all written very clearly. Yang Fan finished reading and nodded. Li Duozhua took it and made a new copy of the memorial. After this copy was finished, he had to read it again in case there were any mistakes. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he immediately sealed it with a seal, sealed it with wax, and pressed a secret command. In a loud voice he called, "Come!" A guard walked into the commander's tent and stood with his hands folded. Li Duozhua handed over the secret memorial and said in a low voice, "Send it to the capital on a fast horse 800 li away. Send it to the capital immediately." In Wuqing Hall, Wan was anxiously reading through the memorials in her hands. Fu Qingqing was at another table, helping Wan sort through the memorials she had finished reading, so that they could be sent to different yamens by the little servant. As for those that were sent to the inner court and approved by the emperor, she had to read them again. Suddenly, she found a mistake on a memorial that needed to be sent to the inner court. Wu Zetian was very strict with these things. If there was a mistake or a smear, she would think that they were not serious. With Wan strictness, she rarely made these kinds of mistakes. Fu Qingqing raised her head and was about to speak, but seeing Wan listless appearance, she swallowed her words. After thinking carefully for a while, she picked up a small knife and carefully scraped away the wrong stroke. She then applied some ointment and smoothed it. Then she pressed down a correct stroke. When it was done, Fu Qingqing looked at it carefully. If one didn't pay attention, they wouldn't be able to see it. With the Empress's current eyes, she was sure that she wouldn't be able to see it. Fu Qingqing smiled proudly and said to Wan, "Sister is a bit tired. Let's rest first before we review." Wan shook her head and said lightly, "No matter. Right now, there are many things to do in the court. There are frequent wars, moving troops, pressing for food, transporting salaries. Any mistake in any of these is a major matter. We can't slack off." Fu Qingqing sighed and lowered her head to continue reviewing. It was true that the state affairs had been too busy recently, but Wan state had persisted for a long time. Ever since Chao Rincher's army had been completely annihilated, Wan had often been absent-minded. As a result, she kept making mistakes in her memorials. After being reprimanded by the emperor, he had no choice but to find her for help. Although Wan had never admitted it, Fu Qingqing, as her most trusted person, had long guessed that her heart belonged to someone else. She had even guessed who the person she liked was. There was still no news of that person. He was most likely dead. No wonder Wan, Fu Qingqing sighed inwardly. Just as she was sighing in her heart, she heard Wan cry out in surprise. She jumped up. Fu Qingqing was startled and raised her head to look. Perhaps because Wan had jumped too quickly, her knee had hit the leg of the table. It hurt so much that tears glistened in her eyes. But strangely, her face was full of smiles and revealed endless joy. Fu Qingqing was surprised and said, "Sister, what's wrong?" I'm fine. I'll leave for a moment." Shanghai Wan held onto the memorials like they were treasures. She limped quickly into the side hall, leaving Fu Qingqing standing there in a daze. Her head was full of question marks.